lost my headphones and shocked myself.
Like we have everything running here, which is good. Let's go ahead and go to our faces. How about that? Right. Thanks everybody for showing up for this live stream. We're getting ready to roll.
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of people here. So
there's a few people, yeah.
Just a few, a little more than usual. Let's see. Looks like we are good to go.
Well, you know, when you bring in the big guns,
that's right.
That's when the crowd comes.
That's right. All right, I think we're good. If y'all want to hit record on your recording apparatus.
Test. Yep.
It is now recording.
All right. 307. Okay, recording here. All right, we're going to do a little sync clap, which will be 1, 2, 3 clap. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Cool. All right. Ready. And turn down my air. Just freezing it out in here. All right. Matthias. All right. Wow. So many. Gosh, so much in the chat. Wow.
Let's do it.
Awesome. All right. Here we go. What's up and welcome to another Mograph Mocast. I'm Dave.
And I'm Matt, and joining us today is our good friend, the CEO of OTOY, Jules Urbach.
Pleasure to be here, guys, as always.
And Mograph is a supplement to our site, mograph.com, which is a motion graphics tutorial site with tutorials, plugins, podcasts, and other Mograph stuff. And on the show, we talk about everything ranging from motion graphics to Cinema 4D, After Effects plugins, render engines, doing business, doing taxes, being a contractor, or working for the man. You can email us, info@mograph.com. Let us know what you think about the show, questions, comments, concerns, queries, grievances, artist suggestions, show topic ideas. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, mograph.com, and all the things. Check us out on there. Send us your questions. It can be new, but can be expert. It doesn't matter what it is. We'll attempt to answer it. Jules is here. Jules is here. Or Kashoom, as I should say.
Kashoom.
Kashoom. You are in the Marvel universe, which is awesome. And
it's crazy.
If you're new here, I am going to give a little info. If you're just joining us for the first time, the way that we do the show is we talk about motion graphics, and then the second half of the show or other part of the show, depending on how much we have to talk about, we will go into crypto art and crypto and all that kind of fun stuff. So you're going to hear the Octane stuff first. And the people that don't want to hear the crypto stuff, they can just turn it off at that point, I guess. We're collecting questions. Here's the thing. We do have a moderator today in the chat just because we've got to be able to copy and paste these questions and hold on to them so we don't miss them. So we are going to be taking your questions. We've got the chat on slow mode today so that we can actually see what's going on. So we are copying and pasting these questions. We will try and answer as much as possible. Some of the questions that are being asked might be something that we already are planning to address. So just hold tight there, and we'll get to as much as we can.
Dave has like 20 pages worth of notes of questions to ask. So
yes, all the notes. Got the Google Doc going. So real quick, before we get into it, we have some week wrap-up things that we want to talk about. We'll try and make it real quick so we can get to the good stuff. The Procreate course is out. If you haven't tried it yet, or you haven't bought it yet, go ahead and get yourself that. Caitlin's course, we are going to be doing a live special with her in a few weeks. You can get info on that, mograph.com/live. Also, scholarship winners.
Ding, ding, ding.
Scholarship winners. Ding, 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 ding. We've got them. Man, there were so many good entries, and we gave it to the judges. We narrowed it down, And so let's start with the Unreal Scholarship winners. We've got 3 winners in that category. Number 1, Matt Zipper. Number 2, Dave, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, I'm sorry, Sejono. And number 3, Hafid Reyes. I hope I pronounced that right as well.
We will be contacting all of you.
We will be contacting you. Also, an honorable mention for Alejandro Taberi. I probably said that wrong as well. The honorable mention, if you got an honorable mention, you will receive the course. You just won't get the whole NFT attached stuff and all of that. So you still get to take the course, which is awesome. And in the Houdini category for the scholarship, John Paul Francisco, Cristobal Lopez, Patrick Ortman, and Graham Bucknell. You are the 4 winners. We did 4 winners of the Houdini scholarship. And then honorable mention, there's 2 honorable mentions for this one, Troy Wunderfall and Ken Heaton. So we will contact you. We'll get you all set up. We'll send you your NFT and your little display that goes along with it, with your certificate and all of that for your scholarship. So
congrats to all the winners.
Congrats to all of y'all. Sorry it took us so long. We just wanted to extend it a little and make sure that everybody had a chance to enter. A lot of people were like bummed that they couldn't enter, and so we had to do that extension. And then one last thing to talk about here is the meetup that's going on. It's this Saturday, right?
Yes, this Saturday at Bryce Canyon Park in Burbank. It's from noon to 6. Come hang out with a bunch of other Mograph friends. You know, big shout out to our sponsors, OTOY and Maxon, for sponsoring the event. We're gonna have a taco truck as well as a bunch of games, outdoor games like cornhole and frisbees, and we bought a bunch of hacky sacks and stuff. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. So come hang out with us. Afterwards, OTOY is hosting an after party. So you guys show up to the meetup in order to come to the after party to get your wristband, and we'll give you all the information there, but it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited. So
yeah. And I really liked that OTOY frisbee that you sent. You sent me a picture of the OTOY frisbee. It was pretty slick looking.
Yeah. We had some custom OTOY and Maxon frisbees that will be given out at the meetup, so that'll be fun.
Yeah. So that's a pretty quick week wrap up, right? We did that quick.
Yeah, there we
All
go.
Right, cool.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the good stuff. We're gonna
get to the good part.
We're gonna start with Octane Render. You got this Black Friday mega launch event going on. The first question I'm gonna ask, because I don't think I've seen the answer to this yet, is how long is this event going on? Is it over? Is it still going?
It's not over. It's through Cyber Monday, which is technically today. And
yeah,
so I
cool.
think we typically have these things going through midnight, GMT or something. It's midnight Cyber Monday. So and there's a little bit of a grace period. So if you get your order in and it doesn't get processed, it's still fine. But yeah, it is through today.
What's crazy to me is that there's so much included. It's like it's ridiculous, and the Grayscale Gorilla Plus subscription, like the 1 year, that alone is worth the price.
I agree. Yeah, I mean it's certainly a giant experiment to what happens, and Black Friday is a small window of time, so it's an opportunity to sort of A/B test what happens when you have all these things in a sub that is at this price and includes this much, and does that drive people to adopt this sub? And that's kind of what we're playing with here. Obviously, we're also making sure our partners, all of them, are remunerated. But it is something that I was very proud. I mean, every Black Friday we try to one up ourselves with everything, versions of Octane, new tech, but also just making the existing subs that we have more valuable, better, sort of a better value users, and also within that Black Friday deal, right, we're discounting these subs fairly significantly. I mean, if you're paying for an annual studio sub, it's like €13.95 a month amortized. It's pretty low. And that does include a full year of GSG if you get it for that deal. A lot of those things, and probably I think some of the questions that we're seeing is what's included in the Black Friday deal and what persists after that. So we could talk about that a little bit if you think that would be relevant.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of the things that we introduced, for example, the kit bash stuff where you can get, one kit bash pack a month. That continues. That actually isn't necessarily related to Black Friday. That will keep going as long as you have a paid sub. You can keep downloading those assets.
Wow.
And we've done the same. Emergen now is it basically even out of beta. We're including that in all subs. It's just you consider it part of the package sub. And we're also going to be bringing a version of World Creator that will work for all subs. It's not quite ready yet. It'll just be limited to exporting Orbex. But for the Black Friday deal, you can get the full version. So that was part of the Black Friday offer. And then with GSG and then Grayscale Gorilla Plus, like, yes, that's over, after the Black Friday deal ends, but we may bring some version of that or some lighter version of that to all subs later next year. I mean, we're looking into that. We want to provide something so that even if you miss Black Friday, there's other things. But everything that's outside of that World Creator full version and the GSG Plus annual, I mean, those things are going to be in your monthly subs in all tiers. Mm-hmm. And that's a big deal. So I think there's just a ton of value. We wanted to add more assets. Obviously, Kitbash is great. Our light stage assets are, again, really fantastic. These are scans that we've been doing for the visual effects industry for all the Marvel movies. And so, we wanted to have a repository of these heads. And I think we're planning to do about 100 of them. Clay's sort of in charge of that project. He's over there nodding. And we'll release as many as we can as they get scanned in. So as you guys saw, we have a light stage scanner that we built actually in the office, so we can push a lot through that.
Next time I'm in town, can I have you guys scan me and then put me in the library? That'd
Saturday.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.
So yeah.
Yeah, a couple questions. People are asking, when they'll be able to pay for the license with crypto as well. Hopefully, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not out of the question. I've hinted at it. I mean, there's certainly a world where, we've already kind of are experimenting with usage-based licensing in the sense that, certainly on the Mac right now, on Metal and Mac OS, there's, pretty much you can use Octane, all of it for free. If you have a Pro Mac, you can get an enterprise license. If you want to use even the C40 plugin for free on one GPU, that's available. So there's that. And I think in the future, what we may do is, our subs are now getting to the point where it's kind of a little bit out of date, where it's like having 2 GPUs in the studio sub. I mean, that's the equivalent of 10 GPUs 4 years ago, right? So what may happen is we may just have something where just like render itself is usage-based. We could look at that. I think that having a sub at the price points we have is still valuable, but there's no reason why we couldn't accept some sort of form of crypto or have you earn your subs by doing stuff like by being part of the render network, for example. Yeah. Those are all possibilities, and we want to explore all of them. I mean, it's not like we're afraid to try crazy things out here. So that's definitely on the table. I just don't have a timetable of exactly when, but crypto and those things do move fast, and I think there's an appetite on my side to see how and when that might be a viable path.
And I know there's a lot of questions, and I've seen them going around this weekend, either in Slack channels or Facebook or whatever about, like sub questions, right? I have such and such sub right now, and I want to convert to this and that kind of thing. Where's the best place if somebody has a very specific question about their sub? Where's the best place for them to go to get to the right person?
help@otoy.com is absolutely the right. Send an email. Kevin and our support team, Kevin Yoon and the support team is standing by literally every Black Friday. We know there's going to be a lot of inquiries, so we prep for that. The team gets ready, and we go through those inquiries as quickly as possible. And we try to make things somewhat easier in that there really isn't much of a difference between the sub tiers other than GPU power, right? So there's not like if you get Studio Enterprise, you're going to get really anything different as far as these extras. But there is a limited time offer on the Black Friday deal, which is the and that includes those 2 pieces, the World Creator full version, GSG Plus. So those things, if you bought a Black Friday annual license last year, it should, as long as you renew it around the same time, you're fine. If you're on a monthly sub, talk to Kevin. We could figure that out to convert you to annual while the time, while it's offer lasts. And I think those are the main questions. It's like, what if I'm on, a monthly? How do I do this? What if I'm not on on an annual that's at this cadence? We can sort of help with that. But the rest of it is definitely, if you have something more specific, talk to Kevin and team at help@otoy.com, and that's the best place to go.
Cool. Now, as far as the Octane 2022 preview,
of
course, I'm most excited about Brigade. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
I actually downloaded the Brigade.
No, let's talk about it now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it now.
I downloaded the Brigade bench installer the other day and played around with it. It is super fast.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's funny. We never released that scene in Octane, but I have it And with Rick, who created that beautiful scene, we worked out like we wanted to have a demo. I mean, it is in some ways the first time when we got that working. You guys came by the office and you guys saw it running live sooner than this, but now it's sort of out there for everyone. And I think it's great. I mean, it just shows the promise of what we've been going after with Brigade for a while, which is we can do path tracing, we can take Octane scenes, and there really isn't much noise. Just a little bit of noise. We're not trying to make it a game engine. It's just meant to be super fast. And we're at the point now where like my 3080 Ti or whatever should be able to do 1080p 30, and one gen above that can do probably 1080p 60, and that's with a fairly heavy scene. That scene is not a lightweight scene. And one of the things that we struggled with Brigade until 2022, right, which is now where we have this path, we want to basically make it so that there's no, for artists, it's just one click. Like you go from path tracing to direct lighting. Yeah. Now we have another one, photon tracing, right? But then you'll just go to Brigade kernel and you'll get what's in that benchmark automatically. And that is working. Like we have that working in an internal build. It didn't make sense to put that out on Black Friday in the preview because there's a lot of testing we still want to do over the next couple of months, but it will be there by the time we get to release candidate 1, sometime very early next year, and then it'll ship with Octane 2022. And it works so far with everything. Now, certain things are noisier than others, but it's pretty great. And the future for real time kind of begins with that Brigade kernel, because it is where, everyone that's looking at this, what do I invest in terms of Unreal and other things? I mean, there's a spectrum between real time and offline rendering, but at least now, I think with the Brigade piece and having that just be a one click, like everything just works in that, you can start to look at how you want to optimize your scene for real time. Because there is the idea of using real time to get the final quality, or I want to do an interactive experience that just has everything that I can render in Octane, but it's real time. And so those are things we'll be addressing over the next year with Brigade shipping as a core part of the whole stack.
Yeah, I can see that really being like my workflow is just having Brigade on in my viewport while I'm working, just to get the look or whatever, and to shoot out fast renders for a client or whatever it is. And honestly, there's some types of projects where just that's all you need. You don't have to then switch over to whatever other kernel and do the long render. I mean, there are projects that's perfect for. So one of the questions, let's see, about render was we're skipping around a little bit here. Yeah. Is when it will integrate C++ and OSL shaders.
That's the Solana stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's probably a next year piece, but one thing that you can kind of already do anyways, obviously OSL shaders can be integrated in any scene you send to render, and that can be run as a job, and that's of course interesting for the future of crypto art, which we can talk about in the later segment. Yeah. But yeah, our work with Solana, and I'll get into that probably when we get into the whole later segment, is for next year, not for the year after. So it's within the time frame of 2022, we want to have our work on Solana figured out and provide basically the pieces that are relevant. And I think that for artists in particular, right? I mean, I get so many inquiries about how do I create a piece of art that you can run on the render network, not just to get my frames back, but that could be triggered, or that could be procedurally generated. I mean, that's just for the artistry of itself, right? People want to have that. And that's one of the reasons why we need a better blockchain system behind it, so that we can do faster transactions and make all that work. So we can do a deep dive on that later, but that's the quick answer is next year.
And Brigade will be in Unity and Unreal as well? Is that right? Okay. Yeah.
It'll be in every DCC plugin, Photon Tracer, same thing. So, those two new kernels will be in everything. It'll be in Unity, it'll be in 3D Studio Max, Cinema, Blender, all of it. It'll be everywhere. And for sure, in Unity and Unreal, the idea is you can use games that are running that Brigade kernel and ship them, and that's kind of the idea that we want to support. And then, with render, we do want to have it so that once you create those pieces, you can export not just Norbex for the static scene or something like that, but you can take your entire Unity or Unreal project and put that on the network, stream that in, run it in a browser, run it in AR and VR. That's also something we can talk about in the next segment. But render is designed not just for offline, but also really heading towards real-time art and experiences that can be hosted on chain on the network.
What about as far as Embergen being inside of some of these other programs like Cinema 4D. I'm kind of this purist. I just want to stay in Cinema the whole time.
Yeah,
you know?
No, I get it. It makes sense. So I think Embergen, the path that the JagFX team has been taking with Embergen has been, it's been sort of their own journey to coming up with the best possible system and that we could then use to plug in. I think Embergen 0.75, which just came out not too long ago, is actually the baseline that we now have so that Ahmed and our C4D developer and others can start baking that into C4D. So that work is going to be starting, I think, in earnest in January. And 0.75 is like a really big milestone that we just needed to hit. And yeah,
it looks beautiful. Looks great.
It looks beautiful. And the Embergen team is working on some great stuff. I mean, by the time that we're probably at this point next year, I would say we'll have sparse volume rendering. They're also working on liquid gen, which is really, really cool. That'll have liquids.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of after years of being like, well, you can use it in beta. I worked out with the Embergen team, like, let's make it part of the sub for right now and the foreseeable future. And same thing with World Creator. Like, there'll be a special bespoke version of World Creator for the subs that you'll be able to use. And if you're kind of using our software to begin with, your OTOY subscriber, probably it'll be all you kind of need or will want to have for integration kind of within our system. But yeah, I think for Embergen, having that within C4D is pretty important. And then we at some point should talk about the fact that we've, with Maxon's full support, we have this amazing license now, not just, to Cinema 4D, but also to Redshift, not just for render, but also for things outside of render. And those have major implications for workflows and things we could be experimenting with in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm really excited about that integration, the announcement with Maxon.
Yeah.
Was it last week or a couple weeks ago, including, so this was a question that a couple people in our Slack had, as far as, will people be able to send straight C4D files to render in order to render, or will they have to wrap them in an Orbex file first?
No, we'll support straight C4D files as a drop-in piece, just because it's simple. The one thing you'll want to do, just like you do now with the Orbex files, is you'll want to run those C4D files in standalone to make sure that they render. But standalone will support loading a C4D file.
That's amazing.
That's cool.
And even better, the standalone, I mean, you won't be able to do much with it, but it will actually be able to bootstrap a version of Redshift and a C4D Redshift file and give you a preview render with a watermark, but at least you'll be able to see whether the thing's actually looking right. So if you don't have Octane and you're not using Orbex, that's the kind of stuff we'll support. And so part of that, the crazy part of the license and all the asks that we had, and that's why it took so long for us to get this sorted out, is, in order to make render useful for people that aren't coming from, let's say, the OTOY ecosystem, right? They're just, you're in C4D, you're using Redshift or maybe even Arnold and not Octane and not anything else, then we wanted to make it so that those C4D files could kind of, we want that validation piece. So the standalone is always a good thing to make sure that everything's there, because you got plugins and other things. So the interesting thing to note about the C4D stuff is that you'll probably still want to be careful about how you export C4D, because if you have, for example, a plugin that isn't on the render network, and right now we're just adding renders, we haven't yet figured out what to do with X particles and other stuff. We may have a simple tool that catches these things for you, like kind of what Orbex does. But I do think that straight C4D, even being able to test other renders within, it won't be called Octane standalone. It'll probably like render standalone is probably how it'll be repackaged. And that should be something that we do want to get working, for example, on the iPad and on the App Store. But yeah, it'll be as simple as that. And that means no exporting. And we're also looking to do the same, with Blender and Unreal files, because certainly with Unreal, exporting from Unreal to Orbex is painful. And we asked Epic to help us with that without even giving a reply back. It was like within 2 weeks, they put out Unreal 4.27, which has a full source code license that you can use for Unreal. And that's something we can leverage on the render network to then deliver Unreal projects similarly. So we're looking at these workflows where it doesn't have to be an Orbex, or if we need to, we can convert to an Orbex on the render network, so you never have to do anything else than just upload your scene, and use the fact that we can then embed these runtimes inside of the standalone tool, so you can at least validate that it's working and cut down on support and other issues before you send it to network. But that's all in play now. So
does that mean that I could, one problem I run into is exporting to Orbex from Cinema 4D. there's been some amazing tools put out. We actually talked about those a couple weeks ago that help you get to Orbx much faster from C40. Yeah. But directly going from C40, I've had issues before. Does that mean I'll be able to take a straight C40 Octane file and even send it? Ah, yes.
I mean, that'll be working first. I mean, it's going to take a little bit more time to get, the C40 and Redshift going, but probably not much more time. So the idea is, what's interesting is that when you're looking at writing a render, like we did say that render will support all render engines. And that was a serious effort on our part, because I do look at render as being a very different, thing than just OTOY or Octane alone. I mean, it's a bigger ecosystem beyond us as a company. It's decentralized and all that, but now you have several options. So our initial plan with the render SDK was, okay, you can build a Hydra render delegate, and that works. Like that's how we got Arnold and even Cycles and Pixar and all these other things running. But now we have this license from Maxon, which means if you have a C40 render, we could be able to just bootstrap you that way. That's how we're going after, we're supporting C40 plus Arnold plus Redshift plus Octane, but it could be plus, standard render, heaven help us pro render even. But it could work with, there's multiple paths. And the idea with render is that we want to figure out really what's the best tool, onboarding system to allow that. Now, granted, the Cinema 4D engine's a black box. That's why Hydra, Orbx, these open source pieces are very important. But there's we also have to be practical. And, years into render now, and certainly 18 months plus since the launch out of beta, these are the things that artists need and want. And thank goodness we have had sort of the enthusiasm and appetite from Maxon to really help develop this integration in a way that I think changes the very nature of how powerful render is and how easy it is for artists, because that's one of the things, we have so much GPUs on the render network, and we have a lot of artists, but we also need to make it easy for those artists to use the render network. And so I think having direct C40 integration, and by the way, you can also put a C40 file in an Orbx, that'll work. That is an option. Cool. Not mandatory though, but yeah, it's a super exciting, game-changing moment for how we handle the whole ecosystem.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And super excited about the new photon tracing, tracing kernel. Yeah. Like, that looks incredible.
Yeah, I've got a list of all the new stuff here. We can go down because I'm sure people want to hear all about, what's coming. Obviously, if you've got a beta of this or whatever, it's considered experimental, and don't use it in production yet unless you're really ready to go down that route. But you've got the photon tracing. Tell us a little bit about that for people who, I think we teased it at some point, maybe on the last time you were on, but give everybody the lowdown on that.
Yeah, so I think the caustics have always been a nightmare, honestly, and still are and were in Octane, because the nature of doing unbiased path tracing is that you let the laws of physics and light sort of run themselves, and it's already amazing how far we've taken that. But caustics, caustics for those that aren't familiar, it's like the patterns you see at the bottom of a pool or with a magnifying glass. Those things do require you to sort of sample light, a lot of light, to get those results. And if you just do that in an unbiased way, it doesn't really get you those things quickly. So the idea of doing a whole new kernel where we implement some of the best research and then do something better with it. I mean, there is something called aggressive photon mapping, which was kind of how we started down this path. It's been implemented in a couple of really good notations, like I think Corona has it. And we wanted to make it so that you could use that, but it wasn't basically limited to just baking. We wanted it so that you can use this photon tracing system in the viewport live. So it doesn't feel like it's baking anything, because it's kind of like baking and rendering at the same time. And it's using something called photon guiding, which is basically helping unbiased renderers know exactly how to sample. So all those things combined in this specific kernel means that you can turn on a material like glass and say, this thing is now telling the renderer caustics are going to happen. And then you'll get really high quality caustics, to the point where not only is it almost instantaneous, it's like 1,000 times faster than caustics rendering before. Yeah. But you would never get the kind of sharp caustics or quality ever. I mean, you could let Octane run for a long time. It just wouldn't have, it would just take too long to get those samples there. So we've solved that with this kernel, and it's great. It's really easy to use.
In comparison, how is the look in comparison? Like, for example, like there's a distinct difference between like direct lighting and path tracing, the two kernels. Is this new kernel, the photon tracing one, is it based more in a path tracing like the path tracing, or is it more direct lighting? You know,
it's path tracing.
Okay.
So it's pretty much path tracing plus the caustic. So
rock on.
If you're looking for path trace quality, that's what gets that. And yeah, I mean, we basically, yeah, it's not based on direct lighting. It's the full path tracing kernel plus this piece in there, and largely, you know, it's an additive layer on top of what's in the path tracing kernel already.
Does it take any sort of render hit at all? Like, is the render time hit, is it minimal, or even like, what would be the point of me using path tracing when I can use this all the time if it doesn't take any additional time? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's a slight hit, and that's something that we're looking into. I think it's more of a bug than anything else. So by the time that we're done with this, it may be that we don't need the other kernels. But you know, there's a lot of projects that don't use this new kernel, so we didn't want to just, you know. And until we really do sort of understand, and that's why we had to put out this experimental release, because we need to see what happens in real world scenes. You know, we want to have we want to split those pieces out, and we may at some point end up with you know, maybe one, you know, Uber path tracing kernel, but I think for now having them separate makes sense until we're, you know, we've completely isolated all the use cases where there may be a variance. But in theory, no, the speed hit shouldn't be, you know, should be minimal. And if there is something major, it's probably a bug that we can solve. So that's sort of where, yeah.
I have a feeling we're going to be getting a lot of caustic renders coming
soon.
Yeah.
Right. The dailies are coming. Yeah.
Yeah. There's one more thing this does, which is interesting, which is you can kind of, in the earlier builds, and I'm not sure how well this works in the current version because I need to retest it myself, but you could do GI this way as well. Like you could turn certain things on for, you know, for using the you know, sort of the photon tracer to do, you know, very unnoisy GI-like things that are kind of slightly biased. And I need to play with that a bit more, and we need to work on some samples. But that's kind of an option as well that this could open it up to. And in the earlier, you know, when I was making the videos a month ago, that was explicitly in this kernel, and we kind of took it out, but it's something we may put back in as well. It's kind of an intriguing option to get certainly very fast noise-free spotlights. But I think the work that's ahead of us, frankly, is people are asking for how this could work with volumes, you know, volumetric caustics. So there's that kind of work to sort of engage with there. But it's already sort of a game changer for anything that relates to caustics. And of course, you'll see a lot. You're right. You'll see a lot of caustics rendering now that it's cheap, basically free. You know.
Yeah.
You've also got the standard surface material coming. It's like it's like the universal material. Is this an Arnold thing? Is that right?
That's the Arnold.
Yeah,
the Arnold material.
Yeah. So one of the things that came out of our collaboration with Autodesk and Arnold, you know, which was, you know, they were our first partner on the render network. So Arnold, you know, for a while now, we've been internally testing having Arnold run on the network, and it was not just about getting, you know, Arnold on render. It was also about, can we actually make it so that we'll have a pretty similar pipeline, so that if you switch between Arnold and Octane and potentially now Redshift, right, there is some basic industry standard system that we could be using. And Autodesk proposed standard surface, which is what's inside of Arnold, right? That's their kind of take on universal materials as a standard that could be adopted by the industry at large. And in order to get that to happen, you know, you have to have more than one renderer adopt it. So we're like, we'll be the second one. And I think that, you know, we've had good feedback from, yeah, maybe it's not just Chad Ashley, by the way, people who like the way Arnold works, who like the way Arnold works, and you know, in C4D and I mean, you know, there's some brilliant thinking behind those things. And so the second this preview is released, especially with the Arnold standard volume in particular, like, oh, we love the way that this is set up. It's very intuitive and artist friendly. So we're not taking away the old universal material. It's there. It still is supported. There are things that it does a bit differently. But if you're coming from the Arnold workflow, or you're learning about, you know, or you want to think about how standard surface works, it's a bit different, right? The way that you set things up with weights and stuff, it's a little bit more artist friendly. It's a little bit less granular in terms of its complexity, but it can do a lot, and it's there now. So it's a material, you know, pipeline that we have enabled for artists that are coming from Arnold, or that just want to, you know, use that workflow. The goal is to try to get it so that if you plug in the same inputs into this as you would in Arnold, you end up with exactly the same renders. I mean, it's a bit hard to do that because there are just differences in the renders, but at least the materials probably wouldn't have to be different. And, you know, we're working with the Arnold team to sort of get a little bit more granularity in exactly the specifics of how they're sampling BRDS in Arnold, so that we can try to get exactly the same results. And material libraries can kind of go out in one format. It can work across multiple renders. And we're going to try that with Redshift as well. Like, we can build, you know, they have OSL support, which is pretty powerful in Redshift. So we can see if we can come up with a way to put out materials that work really well in all the renders that we could support, let's say on render, but also that would, I think, be of enormous benefit to artists and those putting out assets, for our ecosystems.
You've also got the, sorry, Matt, you got another
No,
question?
that's an interesting question. And I think I know the answer, but someone asked, will Arnold jobs on render use CPUs as well? Yeah, but I'm pretty sure work? It's, the whole...
It's GPU.
Yeah,
so it's
GPU,
and the reason why is that it's if you look at the equivalent, first of all, there is no Redshift CPU, and it's like we've done a Octane CPU thing, and it's just ridiculous. Like it just doesn't even well, I mean, I'll give you an example. So we on Metal, right, where we have both, we have Intel GPU supported, we have AMD GPU supported, we have we know how NVIDIA runs, we have Apple Silicon. It's looking at the Intel integrated graphics, like the integrated graphics part of the Intel chip is 4 times faster than using all the CPU cores. It's crazy. So for renders that are designed for the GPU world, you're just going to get better efficiency. Now, there is a modality where maybe like we could make it so that like each CPU core is like 1 Octane bench worth of power versus the hundreds that you get on GPU, something like that.
You wouldn't make much render off of that. No.
No, and it's also the kind of thinking where with Arnold, and we know that it scales really nicely on at least 2 GPUs. Not everybody has 8 GPUs or 17, right? And not all the renders scale the same way. So the idea with these is, work that with frankly, the discussions with the Redshift team and Maxon and the Arnold folks have been going for a long time. So the idea was that Octane benches are a starting point, and it's pretty much like you're paying for Octane bench time, but it's on us to make sure that Panos was like, yeah, that pretty much matches to Redshift power as well. It's pretty, it's fine. But what we'll do is that if an Arnold job doesn't scale to 8 GPUs, we'll find 2 GPU nodes to send those jobs to so that it's maximized. And I do think that Arnold GPU is now at the point. That's why we waited to announce it. Arnold GPU, I think, has feature parity with CPU. And yeah, we're a GPU rendering network. It just makes sense to focus on those kinds of workflows. Even RenderMan, the old legacy renderers now has XPU, right? So there is a world where I think every render in the planet's going to have a GPU mode, and that's kind of what we want to try to engage with.
And you've also got the standard volume being introduced as well. And what's the difference between that and a volume medium, I guess?
I think there it's similar to the difference between standard surface, and it's based, of course, on the Arnold standard volume. It's similar to it's in the same, and for the same reasons we introduced both. So Arnold has standard volume, standard surface, and we're also going to be adopting Arnold lights because they're really nice. They're simple to use. So we're just going through and doing this piece by piece, because I think that's a workflow that's kind of been proven even outside of our sort of own ecosystem as being very artist friendly and intuitive. So adding that on top of Octane and not taking anything away, I think makes a lot of sense. And the initial feedback was that the standard volume, Arnold standard volume, is so easy to sort of imagine or think about from an artist perspective that already feels like it's a great move to add that, And so if artists sort of gravitate towards that, and standard material packs that are out there that use volumes can sort of stick with that, I think Octane will render it perfectly, and hopefully so any other renderer that adopts that format, obviously including Arnold. So it's those two are basically coming from the Arnold workflow.
As far as workflow goes, like say for example you start using the standard volumes, and even once you get integrated the Arnold lights and stuff, will you need to switch over to that Arnold kernel within Octane, or will it work within, like, just say standard path tracing kernel?
So I think that the standard path tracing kernel is basically Octane's standard path tracing kernel. When we showed multi-render, and this is somewhat different from having multiple renderers on the render network, right, which is a cloud rendering service, or even standalone where you can sort of swap in other stuff. But multi-render is a almost like how we wanted to initially bring in Brigade, which is you can create a custom kernel, and that is basically almost like a drop-in from the kernel menu. We can do that through something called Hydra, which is an API created by Pixar that allows you to drop into the renders. Now, the problem is it works. Like I've shown a year ago, I had Arnold, like literally switch between Arnold, you switch between Cycles and Pixar and all the Octane ones. And it works actually really well. The problem is the materials, Hydra does not, and USD, which is what it's kind of based on, don't define those materials that well. So that's where this interest of like, well, if we support a material system that Hydra can adopt, and that could be Arnold standard surface or Arnold standard volume, then what you're talking about will work through multi-render. And that's one of the goals that we had with the Arnold team, was that if we can prove through multi-render that you can take Arnold standard surface, Arnold standard volumes, use multi-render, load in Arnold as a Hydra render delegate, not through SKU4D, not as some bespoke thing, and those renders look pretty much the same, then you're at that point. And that becomes then a challenge for other renderers through Hydra to be able to have that same sort of visual parity, and that's where that's going. The work that we've done with multi-render is complex. It's Hydra inside of every single DTC is something that is wild because not everybody has that. Like we bring that to C4D, it'd come to Blender, it'd come to Unreal, Unity. You could drop in any render delegate, and Redshift also has a render delegate, right? V-Ray, all these engines have that. So in addition to that C4D path that we can load in C4D rendering engines, we also have this Hydra render delegate path, and that's where we started from with multi-render. That does need a standard material system, and we're sort of nominating the Arnold one as a pretty good starting point. And of course, most renderers now support OSL for procedural. Yeah. So between that and somewhere on the list, I mentioned that we're also adopting Material X, which has now been adopted by the Academy Software Foundation, which is pretty much pretty robust standards body group. When they're finished with how they define OSL and Material X, then I think we'll have that as a pretty good basis. And I think standard surface and standard volume will still be part of that spec as well.
Mm-hmm. And the emission and the volumes is updated as well, right? The black body volume emission improvements?
Yep. Yeah. That's sort of a bit granular, but we've been working on improving that. We also, I think as people were seeing in 2021, which is actually only went stable, I think a month ago, we've been doing significant work with overlapping volumes. I think one of the big asks that's still out there is, can we have worse volume rendering that's even faster? And in a sense, probably when we're done with the Brigade kernel, we're probably going to experiment with some of those things. I mean, it'll start with volumes that kind of look like they do now, but we have some interesting options. For example, we do have Embergen's entire rendering stack that we can adopt within Brigade, and that's one of the things we're sort of experimenting with. And I do think that, we want to get it so that the volume rendering pieces have the highest possible fidelity, the easiest flexibility with artists, and also the fastest speed. And there's a lot of thought going in there between, what you want to have, let's say, in real time versus just absolute, perfect fidelity, spectral quality, and all of that.
Is there a chance of doing something similar that you're doing with the photon tracing kernel, where you could do something similar to that with volumes? Yeah, it's definitely, so when we're talking about volume caustics, and as mentioned, the photon tracer can even do surface-based, GI. There's ways of doing that with volumetric rendering as well. And I think once we get volume caustics working, then you can start to have that same effect be applied for volumetric rendering as well. And there is for sure, and one of the things we want to sort of experiment with, and the photon tracer is kind of the path towards that, is we're caching light. So once we're caching light, we can do GI caches, right, which we do for surfaces. And that could be something that could significantly accelerate certainly animation and final rendering for volumetrics. But what's cool about the way the photon tracer works is you don't feel any of that caching, right? I mean, essentially, you don't feel it. There's no baking step. There's no final gather that you have to wait. It's not a two-step process. It doesn't. It sort of hides that really well, and changes that model somewhat. So we want to kind of go all the way towards nothing has to be baked, and see how far we can get there. But yes, when we get to volumes, there's definitely a lot more work we can do and will be doing in terms of speeding up the results. And then there's also, it didn't make it into the sort of the preview of the roadmap, but we do have a new volumetric denoiser and a whole new AI denoiser in the works as well. Nice. We're actually working on integrating that into the metal version, which has been lacking a bit because of the transition to Apple Silicon, which is a whole crazy thing that upended a lot of stuff with that. And I think that that's also going to help significantly, where there's a lot of stuff with machine learning that we want to sort of rethink with new AI denoiser models and the like. Especially when we have things like photon tracing. Like we haven't really done any training with the new kernels, or even with Brigade. Brigade's not using any of the machine learning denoising. It has its own filtering to make it so that it's as noise-free as possible, especially as you're moving in real time. But it could be improved even further as we expand on those two new kernels more.
Right. And there's a mesh to fog volume node as well.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, so some of these things you can kind of do within, Volume Builder and things like that. But I will say that the second we do something that's in the core, that also works in standalone or works outside of this, the DCC. It's so much faster and it's so much more efficient. So we wanted to make that essentially a custom node type so that we can essentially make that work, with as low memory as possible and as fast as possible. And there's a lot of stuff, for example, with Vectron, where you could do all these crazy OSL shaders and procedurals, but the workflow for that it's hard. You need to have something that really shows how that works a little bit better, which is where we came up with Sculptron, which is where we're going with this sort of like, okay, take a mesh from the scene graph, feed it into Vectron, don't have to necessarily go through C4D to do that. Although what's crazy is we do now have the entire Cinema 4D engine inside of the core. So with that, we're not going to pop up the entire Cinema 4D interface, but we could still leverage, like the C4D noises will now work this way as well. Those will now show up in every DCC tool, not just C4D. And in theory, nodes that are C4D based like that could also be used across DCCs in an Urbex file. But in cases where we see an optimization on GPU, we want to have our own nodes that can make that work as efficiently as possible. And that's where that mesh to volume comes in. That also means mesh to Sculptron, mesh to crazy scattering pieces. And those are all things we also want to put out there as standards, so that Vectron, OSL cameras, which V-Ray just adopted, right? I mean, it'd be great if we can all use OSL and standardize on things like Vectron and cameras so that you just have this, sort of cross-compatibility among renders. And now that a lot of renders have added OSL on the GPU, that becomes a lot more tractable.
Well, whatever saves me steps, I'm happy about that,
Question, real quick question. So I think as I was watching some of the stuff, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I saw someone using a Spectron or a node or a Sculptron node and double clicking and it opening up Sculptron. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
So yeah, as like its own, that was crazy to me. And it seems to me like that could be something similar that you do with like EmberGen or LiquidGen or something like that. Is that kind of the thought?
Correct. That is exactly the thought. So the reason why we've been starting with these modules, as I call them, we announced EmberGen first. Sculptron is kind of our own internal thing that we developed. We basically have this ability, and it doesn't matter whether it's in standalone, it could also be in Cinema 4D or Blender, to pop up any sort of interface for a node. So if, in other words, you want to edit a node, you can have it could be Qt based. I mean, Ahmed's actually working on making it so that we can take even the Cinema 4D nodes, right, and pop those things up inside of an interface. It's similar to what we're doing with Sculptron. EmberGen, the entire interface for EmberGen could be that way as well. So you can take sort of a node that represents a geometry or a scene or anything, and essentially have a custom editor and a custom plugin for it. And those plugins are built ideally on the Render SDK so that those get ported everywhere, and those can be downloaded, and they become not too different from an Orbex or packaged material, an OSL shader, and they can go into LiveDB and the like, and that's where things are heading. So it's super cool. And Sculptron, because we have that tool and it's ours to mess with as we wish, it's kind of going first, but EmberGen will be just like that. So you won't have to download a separate EmberGen or World Creator app. It'll just be a module that can bootstrap its own window, pop it up. Maybe if the DCC supports it, it could be embedded as a panel. But ultimately, the actual node itself can give its own interface, expose that. And we can for sure do that with Blender as well. And we're also, with Unreal, it's possible you might have the equivalent of an Unreal node where you can open up an Unreal project as a node in C4D or Blender. And the reason why that's possible is that Epic, without us even asking them to, put all of the entire node editor system in 4.27 as a library, right? Royalty free. So it's like, okay, that's a lot of work. We have a team on that, but it's going to, that will be for sure a possibility. And I think with C4D, like we'll at least have some sort of basic node graph that can at least allow you to make sure those materials look right. But ultimately, it's super cool. That's, I think, the future of DCCs is interoperability.
Blowing my mind.
Absolutely.
That is insane.
That is how the Metaverse, editing on the Metaverse probably will have to work, especially when you're in AR. You're not going to launch like a desktop app or whatever. It's like that's where. So, we're just trying to prepare for that and think about that and create this holistic example of how it could work and maybe get some standards adopted and see if that goes somewhere. But already, I think, being able to use Sculptron within the DCC of your choice and not to worry about that is really cool. and anything can adopt that.
I was watching that, and I was thinking that it was similar to, in After Effects. After Effects, like the way, Video Copilot does all of their tutorials, like optical flares. They just brings, or even Boris effects. It brings up its own thing within a plugin. Right. It's crazy. That's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah. Man, like 50 steps ahead of everyone. I love this.
Wow.
Another question that came up here too, and is it 2022.1 XB0? Is there a version of that for Metal as well that's going to show up, or are you just waiting until?
It's a few weeks out. I mean, so I actually was using that myself long before I got a CUDA version. It's funny because Metal was working first. We should talk about Metal and Octane X because there's so much stuff in on that as well. Yeah. So the first answer is we skipped 2020.2 and we skipped 2021 almost entirely on Metal for a number of reasons. Part of that is because, well, we're at 2022 and we're close enough now where we want to have features that weren't in the CUDA version. There are some things that were in Octane X, even if it didn't have exactly the same features as some of the later CUDA releases that weren't in the CUDA version or the Windows version for HDR viewports and other things. Those are all now the same. So with Octane 2022, both Octane X and Octane Render on CUDA will be identical. I mean, identical features, Photon Tracer, even Brigade, even though it won't have hardware acceleration with ray tracing hardware, fully supported on Metal, because most of the Metal APIs don't have that yet. It should work. And when 2022 RC1 or Stable goes out, I mean, it'll be on both. And, we're basically looking at that version as also where we drop, because it's crazy on Metal. Right now, Octane X, with a 2020.1.5 feature, supports 2012 GPUs. Like that old trash can Mac Pro can run Octane 2020, right? Mm-hmm. And we'll be dropping support for those older ones with 2022 and these new kernels, focusing heavily on Apple Silicon, which obviously starting towards the end of next year is the only hardware that Apple will ship. Right. So that is the future of the Mac. Obviously, we'll support AMD to the degree we can, Intel as well, but those are not going to be in future Apple hardware. So for us, like the real, forward-looking investment in time is what's Apple doing with their own hardware. But yeah, 2022 we'll take that on, and we'll also have a lot of stuff going on the iPad and on the phones. But that's where we're looking with 2022's release. We'll have 2022 running on iPad and iPhone. And the only reason why we haven't even put out a version yet is because, one, we want to get 2022 on Metal done. Two, there's interface pieces that we want to support on tablets that I think are important, and AR as well. And that'll probably also be reskinned as a render app, because that'll also be a pretty important piece. If you want to use your one GPU on even the MacBook, the free App Store version of what we now have as Octane X standalone will be your free way of sort of like playing around with your render setup and sending things to the render network. And I think that's an interesting, exploration. Obviously, Apple's, done a lot of promotion and featuring of Octane and Octane X, especially recently with the keynote. So we see that ecosystem, and I think they do as well, as being, professionals looking to have a tablet or a laptop that's incredibly powerful. I think Apple Silicon is stepping up to the plate in incredible ways. So we want to make sure that works. And there are issues that maybe some Mac users have now, like how do I set up network rendering to a PC? How do I add extra GPUs? It's not quite a thing on Apple Silicon. So 2022, I think it's going to be in 2022.2 because it's just going to be too hard to squeeze it into Q1. But that will have interoperability between Metal and CUDA through network rendering. And then you'll have essentially no difference between a network render node on Metal, on CUDA, your iPhone, your iPad, can all be, and also that's probably also where we're going to support, render nodes, for the render network on Metal as well. I mean, that feels like that's going to be the release where that becomes pretty viable. And the idea there is it's an app that lets you run it as a node,
And
question about real quick, can I interrupt? Sure. Question about, you talked about the Apple event, I'm very curious with these new 64 gig unified RAM, like that's insane to me in comparison. Like I've got two 3090s NV linked, and that only gives me 48 gigs of VRAM. Yeah. Like I'm gonna assume eventually they're gonna come out. I'm sorry, what, Dave?
Only 48 gigs.
Only 48 gigs, right?
Yeah.
But I'm gonna assume they're gonna have new iMacs or something with these new 64 gig, and it's like I don't know. I'm curious about, like, speed, like, have you guys seen a speed and Octane bench scores on some of these, new M1 Max unified GPU CPU stuff?
I have one right next to me, right? I have the M1X. I bought it. I fully loaded. And yeah, it is 64 gigs. It's crazy. I mean, I basically am loading scenes on that I can only truly kind of load on an A6000, right? Which is 48 gigs of GPU memory, and this has more. Where I see this going is, and this is really the first time Apple has gone beyond the M1, right? The M1 was 16 gigs, by the way, on the iPad, which is crazy. That's more than a lot of GPUs have on the render network.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's no doubt that you're going to see 128, 256 gig GPUs coming out of this. I mean, I can't say when, and I don't have any special knowledge of that. I mean, I was pretty much, I saw the 64 gig thing not that long before it was publicly announced, and that's that. But I mean, I can see where this is going, as can anyone. I mean, Apple is not even at the halfway point really of converting their entire lineup to Apple Silicon. So you have to imagine by the time they get to the pros and the real desktop machines, you're going to be seeing multiple Octane benches over what we have, multiple VRAM configurations. And yeah, the rough Octane bench of the M1X is somewhere in like the 200, 220 range. Depends on the scene. We haven't, we also want to get to the point where 2022, is kind of there for both CUDA and Metal. And so that we can do an Octane bench that's identical with the same exact version of Octane across both. But, it's not like I didn't put out the scores, almost 2 years ago, right, with showing exactly what each Octane bench score was roughly. But I think that, in the sake of fairness to Apple and even to NVIDIA, like, I feel like there's a benchmark that's official from us should be the same version running the same scenes the same way.
Gotcha.
With or without
that makes sense. Yeah.
RTX. And that's so I think with Octane 2022.2, where we have exactly that, the network rendering, all that, then you'll see the same Octane bench out there. And I don't know whether there'll be any sort of hardware ray tracing support on the Metal side. There may not be, but it'll be, it'll at least be able to be comparable to the RTX off speed, or RTX on. It won't matter because it'll be in the same mix. But 200 and something Octane bench on a on a mid-range laptop, which I think this is. I mean, this thing runs for a long time. It's got very low power. Is pretty great. I mean, if you imagine double that, and double the memory, and you're at 500 and something Octane bench or close to that on a MacBook Pro in 2023 or something, I mean, that's pretty amazing. And that thing can last for 11 hours on batteries. I mean, it's crazy.
Now, I have a whole section here. We'll go ahead and get to this because it's a perfect time for this. Is the 2022.2 roadmap. If you're just joining us, by the way, we're taking these questions down. we are copying and pasting your questions into a giant list. Some of these things we are going to be mentioning at some point anyway, and then we'll kind of circle back around and see what we've missed here. So let's talk about 2022.2 roadmap. And let's go down the list of some of the things coming up here, and we've got some questions in here as well. First of all, 3 times faster particle rendering.
Yeah. So there's a lot of work that we've been doing piece by piece since RTX was announced, right? That allows us to move things that were previously done in CUDA literally onto ray tracing hardware, which is obviously significantly faster. So we couldn't get particles fully ported over to that until 2022, and it's not going to make it into 2022.1, but it's so close that it'll probably be one of the very first things that we roll out in the first 2022.2 release. And that means that if you have particles that are moving around, they'll just render, it's not quite 3, it's like 2.7 times faster, but it's a significant speed up. And it's a little bit like the hardware motion blur that, whenever NVIDIA adds specialized hardware that we can leverage in ray tracing hardware, it's going to get you some significant speed ups. I mean, 2 to 5x is not crazy, but certainly 2 to 3x is the norm when we see specialized ray tracing hardware take over for something that we have to use compute, regular GPU cores to do currently. And that's what we're seeing with this particle increase. So that's pretty much first up for the 2022.2 update. And the next thing that's on that list is multi-render. So we're going to have our first integration of loading in hydro render delegates. The Brigade, separate Brigade that you guys have seen in the actual Brigade bench is an actual render delegate. Before we committed to just bringing in Brigade deep into Octane and just shipping it that way, well, we did develop this as a render delegate so you can plug it into anything with or without Octane being in the middle. So it'll be able to load, again, almost Turing complete. It'll load in through this system. But yeah, we're going to add support for Cycles, Arnold, Redshift. And then we also want to support where we can, other renders that are kind of like adjacent to Hydra rendering, but because we have this source code, like Eevee and Unreal Engine are not impossible to support through the system.
Wow.
And Unreal is the most likely one because we have a really crazy integration. I mean, nobody's used the Octane for Unreal, which is now going to be like the OTOY or the render plugin for Unreal. I mean, you can import. You don't just get an Orbex proxy. You can import Orbex. You can do all these crazy things. And because we have full source code Unreal and we actually have, willing, partner with Epic to do some crazy stuff, I do see us, figuring out how to have all of Unreal inside of the core using this sort of multi-render system to try to get that going. And we'll see. I mean, that's one of the, more ambitious pieces we have for that. But any render delegate, including our own anime renderer, which is a render delegate. I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. That's the thing. I think we could ship the render delegate already. It just felt like there's already so much in this update that it's better to give it another couple of months. And there's a chance we may also take the same thing we did with Brigade and just bake it into the core of Octane so it doesn't rely on a render delegate, but it'll have both, right? So supporting render delegates is important for the larger ecosystem, but we also are going to load these Hydra render delegates for, for this public interface into the core of Octane or into the core of our plugins, and certainly on render. So that'll be in 2020.2. And
you can network render interchangeably at that point between
Metal and
everything.
Yeah. Now you will see that in certain cases, like with Arnold, when I was doing that demo, you saw the Arnold watermark pop up. So you will have to have bring your own license. Will have to be the case. But in the case of for example, how Redshift works on render, and even within, to some degree, the preview window that we have for Redshift within the render core or the render app, there is the idea of using usage-based licensing. So because render itself, for offline renders, is using UBL, I mean, we're certainly looking at having UBL as an option. So, that's essentially what you're asking. If you pay crypto, well, I'm sure if you pay USDC or something that we can sort of turn into a UBL thing, there's probably ways of turning these things on, and we want to explore that. As for live IPR rendering.
So you're saying basically say I've got an Arnold scene or something and I don't actually have an Arnold license for it. The usage-based license, basically you could say, okay, I want to use this for render. So say, for example, would you pay like a premium over what your normal render cost would be in order to cover that Arnold license? Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. It's very cool.
And that's also, that is pretty much how it will work for Redshift, because to use Redshift on the render network, presumably you will have to have a Maxon Redshift license to create the artwork. And presumably the same thing is true for Octane. But effectively, if you download what's going to be the render app, or use the render website, and we're playing around with just eliminating the subscription layer, because the layer that we charge now for subscription is to cover bandwidth, storage, and support. But render is meant to be a decentralized service, not limited to just us. And at that point, when we do a Redshift render, for example, it is a UBL. There is that factor added into the cost plus the Octane bench. So it's the equivalent of shipping and handling, right? And that allows it so that you don't have to type in your Redshift license to use render on the render network. It's just, Redshift Maxon makes their money by having a fee that's added on there, as could anything on the render network. I mean, we could also do the same, and we cover that in a sense through the subscription layer. But in order for render as an ecosystem or a platform to evolve, you need a payment system. If somebody wants to create a service for rendering and not go through OTOY or figure out their own PC ideas, you can create a charge and build users for that. And that's kind of the model that I think is gonna sort of exist on the render network. And especially as the render SDK evolves to allow not just other renders, but entire apps, modules that you're seeing now with Sculptron, where you can plug in an entire little mini app. I mean, we're bundling as many as we can in the OTOY subs that we have, but the idea is that it's even way beyond that. There's a UBL model for those that makes all of those, small developers more money than trying to sell direct, or go to subs or whatever. And that's what we're trying to sort of engender with this larger ecosystem play on render.
And the headless rendering thing is something I'm really excited about, because I'm glued to my desk all the time.
I know.
Working from home and stuff. I would love to take my Mac laptop with Cinema 4D downstairs, outside on the patio, load up a scene, enjoy the fresh air. And then meanwhile, all my 3090s here are like doing all the heavy rendering. It's hot upstairs, but I'm downstairs where it's nice and cool.
With the headless rendering, does that also mean that, like, say I could tell my main machine not to use its GPUs at all, and instead only use my? That's awesome. That's
cool.
That's really neat.
so the way that it's going to work, and we've announced. I mean, there are things that people that are following our roadmap know that certain things get pushed out sometimes a while, because what we do is, as you guys are aware, and as probably many people that are users, I mean, we look at what's the top 10 or what's the top 20, and we prioritize that every month practically, and we just make sure that we don't miss that. Headless rendering is important, but it has never quite gone ahead of some of the other things that made it into the top 10 for 2021. But it also was the reason we had it working at one point for 2020. It was actually up and running. We showed version. The reason why I didn't ship that version was, one, it wasn't quite going to work the way we needed it between Metal and CUDA, so we needed to sort of get that problem solved. But two, it still did Imager and the denoising locally. And that's something that, like if you want to do the denoising, let's say on the GPU on the other system, and you got nothing, right? And we're at the point now where on Apple Silicon, we don't have AVX2, which is what we need to do the AI denoiser. I wanted to make it so you could just do the whole damn thing on the other node and zero on the master node. So we've built that system. It's based similarly on how the Blender integration works, where you can just run Octane server, and you can then have Blender just do nothing but send data back and forth to the Octane server. So what will happen in 2020.2 is we'll have a module similar to how we're building modules and plugins in the core for other things, that'll essentially be like a remote control node. You have a render target, you have a geometry node, anything, and you can send that to another instance of Octane. It could be the node, or it could be, probably we'll have one sort of, run Octane headlessly, and just operate that as a network node renderer, or operate that as a net render node. I mean, they're locally or from the render network, but you'll be able to sort of plug into that and send all of your rendering to that from multiple DCCs. And even the hub aspect of that, if you basically send C4D and Blender to that same hub, you could be able to sort of see both scenes in one thing. So it is a network protocol that can run even over the internet and do live rendering. So you can boot up a node on the render network, not just to do an offline render, but to do a live render, and your GPU locally does nothing. It just sends that traffic back and forth. So that'll work everywhere. It'll just work based on how fast your network is. Is that similar?
Is that similar to like purchasing like a AWS node or something, to where you can run that additional machine or something? That's blowing my mind that it's a lot easier. You'd have the ability to scale up using the render network in your live viewer.
Yes, in your live viewer. That's exactly what that would do. And yes, you can do that on AWS. And the other thing is, what's interesting is that you could also make it so that the Octane standalone interface is in a web browser, and it just plugs into this as a stream. But for the most part, for users, so this is where we're going with live rendering on the render network, right? Before we go into, and yes, we can take your Unreal and Brigade app and do live streaming. What people may want is just to have, if there's 1,000 Octane bench out there, you want to have that in your live viewer, even on a MacBook Pro, which has 250. Why not? And that's something that'll work locally, and it'll work on the render network. And in order to get to work on the render network, we're going to have higher availability of GPUs. But we have so many people on the wait list that the second every time we get a call on Skype, it sort of seems to. Am I still there, by the way?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, you're here.
Okay, thank goodness. Okay, I should turn on Do Not Know. It basically, if you're on the render network and we have enough of those GPUs, we can then let people say, okay, I'm online. Right now, those node operators have to wait to get a job in. What we want to do is make it so that anyone that wants live viewing pays maybe a slight premium in Octane Bench, but also, if you don't have to buy even a single $2,000 GPU to get the kind of compute power, why not?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, studios. This is huge for scalability with studios and stuff like that. Right. Anyone who needs more, like, the only. Sorry,
Matt's excited.
I am excited. That's a huge implication on workflow for the future. Being able to utilize other people's GPUs in order just to see your live render. That's crazy.
Yeah. So the next step from that is, now imagine you had, so we get that working, and that's important, right? The next step is, what happens when you want to have an experience? You want to create a walkthrough. You want to have, a piece of your artwork that's available for people to experience. And there's a lot of Octane artists that are kind of looking at, how do we get this into Unreal or GLTF or something? And this will solve that too, because once those nodes are available to do live rendering for artists, I mean, you know, if there's extra node power, and there certainly seems like there will be, then you can run an instance of something that just allows people to connect into your scene. You also do Twitch-like stuff, right? You're editing your scene. You have this node that's streaming stuff into it. It can also be broadcast to others. But similarly, you can then turn that into its own thing. It's available. You know, you created this walkthrough, like the Starship Enterprise, for example, which we're working on for the Roddenberry Archive. Not an NFT, just for museum quality experiences. Then those live nodes could be used to deliver Brigade or Unreal or anything along those lines on demand. And, you know, that's something that maybe the person that owns that experience, you know, has to charge for, because there is a cost to that, but it can also be paid for in other ways. And that's where the render network itself has such vast opportunities, because it's certainly possible to have, you know, GPU power completely diffused, so that whatever you want to do, if you want to have, you know, more GPU power for your viewport, for your final renders, for the experiences that you publish, for the metaverse, right? You know, we've you know, totally flipped that model on its head. I mean, the fact that you can't even get this kind of compute power, even for any price, frankly, on AWS or you know, Azure. I mean, they're part of the render network, they're partners, but there's just not enough GPUs. There's millions out there in the render network, and there's frankly, you know, probably you know, tens of thousands on the public cloud. And they're not all, you know, hardware high-end ray tracing cards like the 3080s that we have today on the majority of people's, you know, artist workstations. So, yeah.
Now, before we get to the render network stuff, or more of the render network stuff, just two quick things for the 2022.2 preview here. There's a note here about rest position support for Houdini, and I don't know what that is, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah, so it's our number one. So a lot of Houdini users have come back and say, we desperately need this. What it means is that you essentially store the, you know, if you're doing sort of mesh topology changes, somewhere in the shader, for that geometry shader that you're building, let's say you're doing displacement, you can store the original position or the original vertex data, even as it's transformed. So you can always reference it. So if you're doing blend shapes or transformations, you don't lose that in subsequent frames or in subsequent shaders. It just gives you the ability to then look at what is the original vertex map or vertex data for this asset as you change it in the future. So it's not, you know, basically that input has been missing in Octane. It's mostly because, you know, it just allowed more memory, and we haven't gotten to it yet, but that is what that feature will do. And it's really important for Houdini. Tons of Houdini artists have asked for it, and it's been pretty high up on the list. The other thing we're going to be doing is we will have a new IPR for Houdini that'll be based on Ahmed's C40 node graph interface that's going to go into the core.
Cool.
So kind of like the, you know, like the Sculptron and the Embergen pop-up window, we're going to have our own sort of IPR standard, you know, node graph. And even the C40 nodes that you create in Cinema 4D now with the Maxon integration, you'll be able to at least see those as well. And I think that'll make the Houdini experience visually, graphically a lot better. And, you know, Wancho, the Houdini developer, has actually been collaborating with Ahmed on getting that started as we get those pieces going in earnest. So that's exciting.
Awesome. And the last note that I have here is that you got light path expression, OSL imager nodes, and lens effects.
Yes.
As well. The lens effects sounds really cool to me.
Yeah.
I'm excited
about that. We did some really cool. Yeah, me too. So we did a ton of stuff with you know, the OSL shaders for doing things like Vectron. Basically, you know, in order to create your own filters, we added something in 2021 and even a little bit in 2020.2, which allows you to have a compositing node. So in other words, you can do multi-light or, you know, sort of light, you know, sort of the light, you know, blending and all that stuff in post. So the idea, instead of having, you know, specific image or nodes, all those things just become the same as texture nodes, and we add and extend that so that you could do things like lens effects. You can write your own OSL camera shaders that can do that, but what we ended up doing with the universal camera was kind of taking the best of what you could do and giving you a super camera with that, and we want to extend that so that you can have a bunch of plugin nodes that can go into the universal camera, that can do post effects, that can take all these compositing layers. And when you get Brigade in there, it's not just the Brigade kernel that's going to be in 2022. It's going to be there's going to be a full GPU compositor that'll be super fast and super powerful. So you can then take, I mean, even things from other renders, like we get Arnold working, and I showed this, right? And you're running Arnold at the same time, or Redshift at the same time. You can take the volume pass for one, mix it with another, use Z depth. All those OSL shaders, though, will work across all renders, including ones that you render remotely with headless rendering. It's super cool. And imager nodes will also just allow us to do fairly simple, you know, effects that have kind of been sort of possible with hacks, but now, you know, we want to have, you know, really good chromatic aberration and other things. And that's what that feature is designed to support pretty explicitly. And then I'd say there's one other feature here, memory stability. It's been a work in progress. We've been improving stability a lot. 2021 has a lot of stability over even 2020, but 2022.2 will have a full new memory system for out of core, for peer-to-peer, and it'll also be at the same time. That's also why we can't do the Metal CUDA crossover, because we need to do that for both CUDA and Metal at the same time. And then with that improved memory footprint and stability, you'll get cross-rendering between Metal and CUDA worked out.
With the lens effects, are there any like lens flares or anything like that? I know people have asked for like realistic lens flares and stuff.
Yeah.
Get a lot of dailies like that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
all caustics and lens flares.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing, so exactly. So caustics, I think we solved that pretty well. And the lens flares, I mean, certainly getting very fast, quick, real-time lens flares won't be hard. That's already very much on the roadmap. We'll look towards getting that all the way to, here's, up to the diffraction limit of light, or even with diffraction, which is kind of where, we want to go. You'll be able to have really high quality computed lens flares as well. So we'll have this, the spectrum from purely, high fidelity quiescent offline lens flares to the fast, quick turnaround ones. And they'll all be possible essentially through this extension mechanism, depending on whether you want to go for real time at really good quality or the best possible quality that's not absolutely necessary running in real time. They'll both be supported.
Cool.
So
that's very cool.
Render network wise, let's talk about this a little bit.
Yeah.
So is there currently a specific build that you need to be on to use it? Like, is there kind of like, I don't know, like you wouldn't want to run the beta and try and throw something at it, right? Like, is there a specific, is it the current stable build? Is that what it's always on?
So we started, I think, with 2020.15 as the minimum, right? That's why I think we kind of launched Render with 2020.1. And so we added a while back, in the past year, we added support for multiple versions that can run on Render at the same time. So you can still stake to 2020.1.5 as for render jobs, but we added 2020.2. If you're on Octane X, it's actually targeting 20.1.5 and 2021 stable. Once a version is stable, you can use it on Render. That's kind of our threshold. So 2021 is now on Render. I mean, that is on there. And then 2022. .1 when it hits stable or maybe even release candidate, we'll support that on the Render network. We do want to try to avoid experimental builds, having those widely out there, because for one thing, those will change, especially if they're not release candidate. We kind of want to only sort of have builds that are basically done on the Render networks to just minimize support and user error and other things. So that's kind of the the way we're approaching it. Same thing with other renders as well. Like, we want to pretty much just have, for Redshift and Arnold, we'll have the latest stable releases that are there, and support multiple versions of those as well.
A question that came up is on stability, because you actually have this listed as well, is the stability improvements and everything else. From time to time, I'll have like a weird situation in Cinema, and sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out. Is this because I have way too many polygons, or because I'm integrating this plugin, or whatever it is? If somebody's having a really just oddball situation, I know that you like to take those things and look at them and say, okay, what is this, so that we can address that. What is the best place for somebody to hit you up on that as well, and say, hey, I've got this scene that's a little iffy here, and that way they can get it to you and you can actually work on it? Because it's one thing to do that. It's another thing to say, oh, I had a problem with this scene, and then never tell anybody about it, because that's not going to fix anything.
Yeah, exactly. So we do need scenes, and I mean, I'm obviously very active on the Mograph Slack. I brought all you guys were welcome to all of our developers, so they're all on the Slack as well. There's thousands of artists there. I mean, that's actually a pretty good place to start in some cases, because I look at that a lot. The Facebook group's another decent place. I mean, I would say that if you want to really share your scenes, the best thing to do, and there's a real issue that you're dead serious about having us, really look at carefully, is open a help desk ticket, help@otoy.com, and start that process, because that will get to the developers. It bypasses me in a sense, because I'm not in charge of help desk, but that's where you can share your scenes, and that's where you can open a ticket. I would say that if that isn't working, or if there are things that have been sort of posted on the forums or other places, I mean, the Slack channel and even the Facebook group isn't a bad idea because it has high visibility. But at some point, be prepared to share a scene. And what we need to figure out is if you export this as an Urbex, the first question is this something that's only happening in the C4D plugin, for example, if it's in the C4D thing, or is it in the core? Because they're very different pieces. And then the question is also, I mean, if so many problems that we have are frankly related to driver mismatches. Like that's the other thing that that we experience in GPU world is that if the drivers aren't quite exactly right with the version that you're using, I mean, things can go crazy or they can run perfectly smooth. And so there are users that I've never had a problem with. Octane 2022 is stable, 21 is even more stable, never had an issue. Those, that's great. But obviously the ones that do have issues, we need to figure out what's going on. Drivers are generally like half of the reason why that happens. Other times it's our fault. I mean, if something is some issue or some limitation Octane with memory or geometry, those exist. Like those are real things that, I mean, a 3090 definitely makes it better. 64 gigs of memory on a M1X means you don't have to worry about out of core so much. But yeah, Octane has issues when you're filling up that memory or going even out of core. So we're working on those. Headless rendering will help, obviously, when you don't have to worry about C4D itself being brought down. But then there are things that are nothing to do with us at all. And that could be from other plugins, other things that are going on. So it's a process that, we're dedicated to fixing. I mean, that's more important than new features at this point is making sure that everyone's got a stable and good experience. And I do think we fixed so much this past year that I do think 2021's very stable, 2020.2 is stable. It's just a question of what we missed and what can we fix incrementally, but also in a deeper sense as we get into the rest of this coming year.
Sometimes I'll have a little problem in Cinema 4D, and I'll be like, man, what is the deal here? And Matt will be like, is your Cinema 4D up to date? Is your drivers up to date? Is your Octane up to date? And I'll be like, no. No, it's not.
Quick question.
Octane X, I think also,
We had talked previously about this, and I'm not sure if this is still on the roadmap or if not at all. But we had talked previously about, when encountering crashes, like say through C4D or something, that setting it up to where it was just restarting Octane instead of having to restart the entire, DCC. Is that still on the roadmap?
Yes. And that's because of headless rendering. So headless rendering, when we talked about this previously, it was with headless rendering because if there's no GPU or even rendering going on inside of C4D, and it's just a little network node that's sending data back and forth, then at least if it's Octane that's crashing, it'll crash, and it's like that browser tab crashing. The whole browser doesn't go down. You just reload the tab. That's how it works in Blender. So all Blender users since the beginning of time that we've had a Blender plugin have had that exact same experience. They basically are creating Octane as a separate process. It's sort of a manual thing. You have to download a special Octane server and it runs. But the headless rendering piece that we're talking about will work exactly like that. For all DCCs, even for Octane standalone, you can load it up and send all the data to another process. And if that gets broken or torn down, it'll be a lot like like the network rendering, where you can just flip the switch and reconnect to it and re-render. And that's what headless rendering done the way we're talking about will do. And that's part of why it wasn't possible to do before, because still things like imagers work and denoising. If that crashed the system and everything else is headless, it still wouldn't help. So we wanted to really just completely separate everything that was on the GPU. I mean, ultimately, it's almost like a browser that's connecting over a network data stream to the renderer, and that is going to be have a lot less of a footprint for things to go wrong. And if something does go wrong, that'll crash, but you can reboot it, reload it, and continue rendering. That's where that feature will come in. So headless rendering is the key to getting to not having the DCC itself be pulled down from the renderer going down.
Cool. A lot of artists are asking too, like when can they participate in render? In
render,
yeah. Well, I think that the answer is, I mean, certainly sign up, but the sign up list is so long. I mean, it's months now. Now, I can speak to why that is. I think that part of it is we haven't really heavily marketed, believe it or not, render to a lot of our users. I mean, we have so many subscribers that have access to the render network. There's tens of thousands, honestly, that could be leveraging it. And I think that one of the things that I wanted to wait on was I wanted to get the Maxon integration piece sorted out. And I want to get that up and running, because honestly, if you can just send a C4D file, then I can send you an email blast saying, use render, it's fine. Here's even some pre-rendered credits or whatever, because then it'll be easy. And then I think we can see a huge amount of demand going up. Right now, it's like word of mouth. Like you guys, remember we were at Camp Mograph, you're saying, well, I've got 10 3090s and man, I don't even need them to render locally anymore. I run render on them and I can send my jobs to the render network. I think once people figure out how that really works, they'll have a lot more sort of artists on it. But I think we also want to limit, we don't want that sort of spigot to sort of be unwound with the C4D part not being there. So I think once we have that, and you can send a C4D file or you can Blender in other formats, that'll be nice. There'll be reasons why I think still exporting to Orbex makes sense, but at least it's going to be there as an option. So that's where I think those signups, that waiting list will go down significantly. And the second we add real-time rendering, I mean, I think we'll eat through that wait list pretty quickly. So in the meantime, just signing up, render.x.io is the new site for render. And you don't have to have any sort of subscription or anything to sign up for hosting a render network node. It's open to anyone, but there is a wait list and you have to be whitelisted. But we expect to go through that wait list pretty quickly.
Once you get
these next steps.
that render IPR working, you're gonna need a lot more nodes.
Oh man,
you're gonna need a lot more nodes.
A lot more nodes. And the wait list though is significant. I mean, it's like there's probably enough nodes for every single artist, including multiple GPUs, which is crazy. If we ate through that entire current wait list, and that's only growing. So I think that, I think the live IPR stuff is going to be absolutely awesome. And then I think when we get into, just using the render network for real-time instances and streaming, you're going to be a whole other world of utility.
Yeah.
Are there plans to use render nodes? This is one of our questions, to do other things like neural engine tasks or physics computations?
Yes. Well, yeah, absolutely. So here's the thing with EmberGen, right? EmberGen's a GPU simulator in the sense that, it has its own node system, but the reason why we adopted it was that it's a little bit like Octane itself. It's like we want to sort of dog food a physics system that uses GPU power, right? And EmberGen does that for smoke and fire and soon fluids. So I do see the simulation piece, and Houdini obviously is another important partner of ours as well. You want to have that available as well on network. So whether or not we have other benchmarks that translate Octane Bench into some simulation task, or we just standardize on some sort of utility or usage of the GPU, simulation work is for sure coming to the render network. The other thing that I think is absolutely already going to be something we're going to use is AI. Now we have AI denoising, for example, in Octane, but how do we train that? We actually have Amazon GPU nodes that we use for the training data set. We just run those, and we'd like to move those over to render.
Yeah.
And then if you guys saw the Solana talk, the very last frame I showed, right? I showed all the stuff we're doing with the Roddenberry archive. And at the very last slide, I was like, look, this is our first synthetic version of Spock, with, Adam Nimoy, who's a friend of Rod Roddenberry, my partner and best friend, sort of gave the okay, like, yeah, this is my dad. But that actually took a huge amount of AI to generate. It's not a deep fake in the traditional sense. It's using, we're mixing that like light stage, and we want to be able to render it, of course, in CG. But in order to generate animations with some of the light stage data sets that we're putting out there, you want to have a targeted video capture, and you want to run that through a neural network, and that is a huge amount of GPU power.
Yeah.
So as we start getting those synthetic characters generated at this quality, I think that'll use even more power than ray tracing and normal rendering itself. And you have so many of those kinds of jobs that have always been sort of this latent, sort of bubbling source on the render network. We did this, thing with Facebook for basically doing light field generation from scene data with the red camera. That camera never really got mass adoption, but the concept of having the render network available for scanning, data and generating something in 3D for you is huge. That's going to be an enormous amount of work that's done on network. And looking at how long and how expensive it was to generate just one image of Spock that looked good for the Roddenberry archive, that's going to be for sure what we use the render network for, because it's going to, I think that's where we want to go with this kind of stuff. And I think as people start adopting synthetic characters and avatars and want that kind of quality, even if you want to render it in real time, you still need to generate that animation at that fidelity. Otherwise, it's not going to quite look right. There's a reason why it takes so long to get it to be that quality. So I see render being absolutely important for that. And then for just general purpose AI jobs, we're adopting a language called Rust, which is a safe, high-performance language. We're going to be basically backing an open source project that allows you to just use Rust to generate both GPU jobs, CPU jobs that can sort of set up the GPU work, and also target Rust for the Solana blockchain, which is another conversation we can have around the Solana integration. Yeah. All through Render SDK, which is all going to be in the standalone tools. It'll be like OSL shaders. You can write code or scripts in the node graph and build things from that. Yeah.
So, tell us a little bit too about.
Hold on, real quick, because my mind's racing as you're talking. So with the Render SDK, basically anyone can build a GPU-based, program or something, and then run it on the Render network. Correct?
That is correct.
Wow.
So the way the SDK will work is you guys were right to point out how that Sculptron node works, because you still want to have some sort of input and output into a job. It's not just here, take a Docker container and a VM and do whatever. The idea is that we're going to start towards, like, there's input, there's some sort of graphical connection, even if it's an image or it's data, but it's still the same sort of idea of a graph. And what you can do is, if you can take Emergen, or you can take World Creator, you can take anything that plugs into a node, and you can take data going into the node that starts the render job. Like, when you're doing a render job now, you can pick a frame, eventually be able to do a real-time, live connection to your IPR. But having the idea of creating a graph with input and output means you can connect jobs together, and you can build anything that goes into that node. And so we have the ability to create scripted node graphs, OSL node graphs, and soon you'll be able to just write in any language you want, but ideally Rust, and have those things happen on chain, on the GPU, and create almost anything. And you can then sort of push that, or I guess even abuse that a little bit towards any sort of task you might want to set up. That, I think, is a healthier and more ecosystem-friendly way of doing this than just a pure virtual machine or a Docker container, because it forces the software itself to interoperate with other pieces of the render network. And I think all things that we're looking at doing in some form or another have data that is consumable, or sort of first-class data that needs to be consumed graphically. But you don't have to do that. I mean, there's already ways you can create a script that generates data and get that data back from a render job along with your image. So it's all kind of possible.
Are there any concerns about like bandwidth? Like, say for example, if I'm using render for a live IPR, or streaming video or something like that, is there worry about bandwidth and the nodes going down and coming back up? How would you get past that?
Yeah, well, I think that you have it's funny, because everything that we've done on Render, we've pretty much already done on Amazon. So we had cloud rendering on Amazon with Orc. Now it's on Render. We have live streaming running on Amazon even before Orc. It was up and running, I think, in 2014. You used to be able to go on the Octane OTOY website and actually boot up a web stream of Octane on demand everywhere. What's interesting is that also, I mean, just like there are render jobs on Amazon that would fail and give you a black frame, well, what would happen is we just go to the next node and we send the job there, and we'd also have that resilience. So on the decentralized network, everyone that's on there, it's like an Uber driver, right? You have a score. If your score is 5, you've never gone down, your availability is great, and you're dependable. So for live streaming, you're always on, you're ready to go, and there's so many of you that if you don't work, we'll go to the next one. And it's kind of like that. I mean, obviously there's a question of, it's how important is the live stream itself as an experience, and where is the state of it stored? So if the state of what you're doing in the live stream is stored on the blockchain, which is where the Solana piece comes in, and you do something, you're changing something, and it doesn't just go down with the live stream is just consuming the render of it, then it's easy to boot up another stream, or even have another stream ready to go, and multiple people can be watching that session with totally different nodes providing that window into it, and you just switch to another viewport. And that's kind of how I see that working. There is always a possibility of massive things going down or whatever, but I think it'll survive that. And we do also have the Amazon, Azure, and Google nodes that are there for maximum availability, lowest downtime. They're more expensive, but that's why we have them there. Depends how important and how reliable those nodes need to be if there's availability.
And we'll be able to find nearby nodes.
Yeah,
local.
Well, that's the beauty of the render network is we have there's maybe 10 AWS data centers that we've used for streaming. There's 1,200 different spots all over the world. If you look at the map that we put out when we first had signups, so those first 1,200, it's everywhere, every continent, every country. So, and they're close. So we get live streaming nodes that are reliable, that are within 10 or 15 milliseconds. That's fantastic. That's the power of decentralized rendering. We don't need to build data centers or wait for all that to happen or invest in massive amounts of GPU. Cloud gaming farms, it's all kind of latent in there. And we're starting with a foundation that is high utility for sort of a demanding audience, which is artists and creators. But then that also leads towards having a good foundation for doing cloud gaming, live streaming. I mean, even having a simple version of artist tools that you can run from a stream inside of an app like Messenger or something that's all completely handled. The DCC, the whole thing is as part of the live stream, and you don't have to have anything other than a web page on.
And along the same
on your
lines,
device.
the nodes, like you were talking about, there's a node in there, right? These nodes could also be used to contain an existing render and then give people credit for that render as well, right?
Exactly. So, we're not quite there yet, but when you look at the things that we've added for, basically Kit Bash 3D, right, where you now get no matter what sub you're on, you can get a new Kit Bash 3D asset every month. And with Lightstage, same thing, we're adding more heads. The idea is that, and we'll probably experiment with this first with Lightstage heads, is that if you want to use a head and you don't want to pay for it, the first head was Clay, so it's Clay's asset. He can decide what he wants to do with it. But, one of the things we're doing with Lightstage is we're scanning in celebrities. We're scanning in their likenesses. Now, this is, by the way, before NFTs even took off. But this is my deal with Ari, with Endeavor, right? Which is that we basically can create these high quality scans of the person. And then now that NFTs are a thing, now that there is sort of a blockchain system, whenever that gets used by an artist, you can use the head for free, but the actual creator of that artwork or the person whose likeness it is can get a royalty of it. And that can be determined not too dissimilarly for how you get a premium usage-based license for a third-party render or even our render, right? So this kind of thinking is pretty cool. That means that if you were to, let's say, and this is something we haven't done yet, but if Kitbash or GSG or TurboSquid or anyone else were to say, okay, all our assets are hashed, and instead of buying this thing, you're getting access to them one at a time. We'll let you do stuff with them, but we're going to get a piece of that art.
Yes.
And that's a model you can definitely try out, and that's what Render is designed for.
Love that.
Because already we know that with Kitbash, like we already have kind of like all the assets. Typically on Render, the way that it works is whoever uploads something first is the creator. Whoever generates that image and can then regenerate it with their render job is typically the creator of it. But if they use textures or assets that have been uploaded first by somebody else, then we can say, well, where did that come from and who owns that? And that's kind of where those kinds of opportunities for marketplaces become really interesting. I don't see us building explicitly those marketplaces, but there's a system for any of those marketplaces to be built. And as we talk about the next phase, all the stuff with Metaplex and Solana, there's a reason why we picked them as a partner as well for that kind of flexibility and sort of scaffolding for the future of digital assets and sales and all that. And I think that transcends the whole NFT piece as well. To be honest.
That makes sense. It's so great for the artist because any asset that they create, especially the smaller artists, they work really hard on something and then they put it out there and they're only selling it for a few bucks and then somebody pirates it and it's like, it was only $5, guys. Like, at least people can get credit for that, or they can implement a system where you don't have to pay the outright price. It's like, here it is, and anytime you use it, I'm going to automatically get a credit or something. Like, that's a great idea. That is amazing.
Yeah, that is cool.
So we're almost to our NFT section now that we're almost 2 hours in. And there's one more question I wanted to put out there, and this is from Anthony Abbott. He says, what can you say to persuade studios?
I'm going to run to the restroom real quick. I'll be right back.
What can you say to persuade studios to adopt Octane? He said, it's a personal favorite, but right now it's a nightmare trying to get my boss to use it. We've adopted, we write code to use it, had different pricing models and license issues. I know that some studios pick a render engine for a certain reason, right? Like, this is what's compatible with us, or on Mac, or whatever it is. So what would you say? I mean, I don't think you really have to say anything to persuade them if they're watching this episode, but what would you say to them to get them on board and get them using render and everything?
Well, I would definitely say, obviously you're right. If they're watching this, then they know all the great stuff we're working on. I will say that we simplified our licensing model significantly, which I think helps. There used to be, box licenses. I mean, to be honest, we're phasing those out. I mean, no one's really buying, a perpetual license anymore. So the subscriptions are designed to be, you get everything. You essentially, if you're a studio, you're probably going to get the enterprise license, which is, $30 a month. And I also think that, it depends on the studio. Some studios do have more bespoke needs. They want a licensed server where, we're working on those as well. But I would say that, we're there to support, these models, at the studio level with a simplified, set of licenses. I think that was one of the confusing factors. And also, we have just great support and stability in the last year. I mean, Octane's done incredibly well. We've seen our user base just explode. So it's not just individual artists, it's also been in studios as well. So it's something that, we're always engaged in. And to be honest, if there are specific things like that list, I'd like Anthony to sort of send me a specific, 1, 2, 3 or whatever, so we can go through it with the team. because that's the easiest way for me to sort of dig through that particular issues that he might be having at his place, and like I'll get on the phone with his boss, with the team, and we're there to help. So
Yeah.
I mean, I do that. That's my job,
I think a lot of the hang up, honestly, like until now, has been the whole Mac thing, right? Because there's so many people that just love Mac, and I understand. I love the OS and Mac. I love their file manager and all that kind of stuff. And I had to switch to Windows because, in order to do this stuff with NVIDIA and everything else, and really, build a farm here locally and all of that stuff, just had to switch to PC. So it feels like now a lot of options are coming out, because Apple is actually, developing their new technologies, and B, because you're on it now. So hopefully some of that hesitation is gone. I understand Mac people, I know.
And honestly, if the issue is the Mac version, I mean, obviously Apple's been a close partner, and you have Octane running on Mac, Apple Silicon, and even, 10-year-old GPUs. But I think that going forward, I mean, some of the question on stability as well. I mean, the Apple Silicon is going to be a lot more stable than any other GPU we've ever been able to target, because actually GPU memory and CPU memory are the same. It's in some ways it's a simpler system, and we're going to be doubling down on that with 2022. So if your studio is filled with Macs, and you're looking at the future of the Mac as an important part of what your studio is going to be doing, then that's probably good news, because we can, we're certainly all in on the Apple Metal ecosystem, have been for years, and certainly will be for the rest of this decade going forward, probably longer to come.
Cool. All right, Matt, are you ready for this?
Let's get into the drop.
Let's do it.
The drop.
Is this the fucking mic? Drop. This is exactly what I should be doing.
What's up, and welcome to this week's episode of The Drop, your weekly source for all things NFT and crypto art, as well as upcoming drops by notable people in the Mograph industry. I'm Matt Milstead. Joining me, as always, is Dave Koss. Joining us this week, CEO of OTOY and Render, Jules Urbach. So super excited to talk crypto art, NFTs, Solana, all of the above.
Yeah, we'll keep the regular drop stuff to a minimum today. Just a quick
it's actually like I just wanted to instead of going through everyone. Luckily, I didn't see any big drops on Maker's Place this week, but I just wanted to do a quick couple mentions on some of the artists dropping this week on Nifty Gateway. First one is Philip Hodis. He's doing a drop today on Nifty Gateway, and he's been posting some of his stuff lately. Really, really cool stuff. Philip does just amazing work. Super excited about his drop. And then next up on the first, we've got Gavin Shapiro is doing another drop, which is fantastic. This one is like a collector's only, like drawing for a zoetrope, like an actual physical zoetrope, which is really cool. Like he teased one of these a while ago, and I believe it wasn't an actual physical thing, but I think these are, and it's super, super cool. So that drop happens December 1st.
Has he moved on to penguins now? He's moved to penguins.
I guess so, yeah. Yeah, okay. No more.
Yeah. All right.
So that's it as far as the big drops. We've got a couple community drops going on. The first one is from Gustav. Gustav says, I have brand new piece dropping on Known Origin on Tuesday, December 7th. Distance/Dissociate is a new cinematic album cover from my latest album of the same name. Ooh, that's really pretty. That's super cool. So that piece is up there. And then we had one from Garrett. Garrett said, hey, Matt and Dave, I just dropped 2 new 4K pieces on Foundation. If you dig it, I would love to and appreciate your thoughts. Had a blast doing these, homage to one of my favorite cartoon worlds. When the collection is done, there will be 6 swords made. Decided to drop the first 2 now. Released a teaser trailer also on Twitter.
Oh, is it Adventure Time?
I think it's Adventure Time, yeah.
That's interesting. Oh,
that's fun. That's fun.
Huh.
So there you go.
Cool.
And then if anyone's interested, I also still have my piece available on Foundation.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
That's right. What is your asking price?
It's
on
like
that?
0.65 ETH, I think. So, ETH has been fluctuating lately. Been going in between 4,000 and 4,700. So, whatever. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. Well, before we get into everything, I think, oh boy, Dorpy's here. Hey, Matt. Hey, Jules. Happy holidays.
Wow. I was really hoping we'd skip Dorpy this week.
Nope. I'm assuming we're talking about render engines and not the type of rendering that they did to my friend Harold the horse. May he rest in peace. I just needed to stop by real quick and tell you a little trick that I learned this week. I had no idea that you could swap crypto for tokens right in your MetaMask. Just log in and hit swap. It's that easy. I know most of you know that, but I didn't. And I know some other tricks too. Want to see me shake? Just open up my Coinbase. Yeah. I found out this info from a purebred friend of mine. He's not an actual purebred, though. We just call him that because he eats too many carbs.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay, bye.
Oh, thank God it's over.
Shout out to Richard Day for helping me with some Dorpy jokes as well. So, yes, in all seriousness, though, let's get to the good stuff.
Yes.
Here's the thing. And I wanted to talk about this. We're going to talk about the metaverse. We're going to talk about render and now as a token, of course.
Yes.
And it's just the future and NFTs and all this fun stuff. And here's what I like about render token is there's this economy around it. If you're watching the earlier part of the podcast here, then you know about everything that's kind of going on. And you can spend render. You can render something and get tokens back in exchange. It's kind of this like awesome ecosystem. It's like a self-sustaining ecosystem. And when you're talking about, you're hearing about the metaverse, you're hearing about what it's going to do and how it's going to make certain industries like independent and give people stakes and everything. It's just such a great ecosystem because it's just like this cyclical thing. Especially when it's not just Octane either, right? We're talking about like this is other render engines. This is not any, but a lot of the engines and apps that artists are using. So it's something that has this economy behind it. So so we talked about render, render network and putting your sending stuff to render. Let's talk a little bit about the token itself because I think that there are a lot of people that are interested in what this is, especially if they're coming from maybe an area where they know nothing about crypto at all.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, that's a whole huge topic of conversation. So, starting from what the utility of the render network is, right, which is to provide all this GPU power to artists and provide this kind of massive compute power. That's very easy, I think, for an artist to understand. But I think, certainly now that we've been doing this for years, I mean, Render did launch officially, out of beta last year, but before that it was in testing. Crypto is something that I think it's still unfamiliar to a lot of artists, right? I mean, they look at they understand Bitcoin and Ethereum as a unit of currency, but what's the rest of this crypto stuff? How do smart contracts work? Now, granted, we do now live in a year where NFTs have just completely transformed the possibilities for how artists can make money. And we've been at the center of that with everyone from, we have probably thousands of Octane artists that are doing incredibly well, selling their artwork created in Octane, on different NFT marketplaces. But Render is a little bit different. The Render token itself was designed to be a utility token, meaning that it's not necessarily a token you buy for speculation or cash. It represents a unit of compute power, or more precisely, however big the network is in terms of its total, if it's Skynet or it's the world computer. There's only a certain number of these tokens. There's 500 million, 500 million or so. So however big the network is, the token represents a fractionalized part of that. And that's how the system works from a crypto perspective. So what we've done is that the tokens, when you get a token or earn a token, it is generally it represents a minimum amount of work, so which we tie to the dollar cost of what it would take to render this in Octane Bench, which is the compute power needed to render in Octane, and it's also used by other renders as well that we've added to the render network. If it costs $1 to render on Amazon, the render network should be able to render it for $1 as well. And the token was essentially saying, rather than spending dollars, spend tokens, right? What's been interesting is that we were able, with the capacity on the network, to take models that were in theory available on Amazon, like, if their spot is in pricing, it's 10 cents instead of $1. And we're able to offer, like, here's tier 3, it's 1/8 the cost, it's 11 cents on the dollar. But unlike Amazon, we have those GPUs available, so you could render those jobs. And the payout in tokens, no matter what the price fluctuation was actually, I think, enough for people to still make money and do make more money than mining cryptocurrencies like Ethereum. So there's a lot of interest, people just wanting to make money and add their GPU power to something that's crypto-centric, like the Render Network, to earn. And that's important because what we're trying to do is we're not trying to displace the Amazons and the Microsofts and the Googles. They exist for a reason. They'll always be there, but there is a hard limit on how fast they're growing versus how many users need GPU power. And we've learned that firsthand when we were developing Orc, which is a precursor to Render. It was running on AWS and the public cloud providers. And one customer in one night would take all of Amazon GPUs, thousands for a 10K C40 render, for example. Wow. And there's no way to build a business around that. And there's certainly there's like a lot of these whale jobs, but the idea with Render is that if you're looking to participate in earning money with your latent GPU power, you could do that. And that it's something that there's so many millions of GPUs that are out there initially set up to mine Ethereum. And with that kind of going away, with Ethereum 2 going to proof of stake, and just with a lot of GPU power out there anyway for people having their GPUs, not always using them, even if they're artists, right, to render, it's a really good system. And I think that somewhere in the other side of that is if you earn those crypto tokens, right, you can also then spend them on rendering. And a lot of artists on the Render Network are also miners, in other words, or what we call node operators, which is they lend their GPU power back in. So there is this sort of virtuous cycle. But I think that there's a whole other audience that we've sort of opened up to, which is the crypto audience, which is why I want to basically participate in this system. And I don't know anything about art or digital art at all. And I've seen a lot of those users become subscribers to Octane and OTOY and all the likes because they want to learn about the other side of the system. And I think that and similarly, so there is sort of this larger spread. But what's happened is I think the free market decides the price of a render token. I mean, that's essentially a value of what is the total value of the system divided by, I mean, I guess there's only 100 million in circulation. So it's essentially 1,000% per token, something along those lines. What is the, that price has fluctuated from 3 cents to now, I think it's like $6 or something. And that's something that's, we've had to sort of account for. We are accounting for the new token economic model that'll make it so that if you're an artist, it'll be straightforward. You'll get a stable amount of Octane bench per amount of value you put in. And, we've been working on that new token economic model for better part of this year, and it should be out by the end of this year. And that'll cover a lot more deep exploration of how the Render Network is going to be working for payouts and for ingestion going forward. But today, artists have a really simple onboarding system, which is they can pay with a credit card, and we have a store of tokens that we then pay out to the node operators so that it stalls running on tokens. And we're going to basically improve that system further with a new token economics model so that everybody has a straightforward path to use and monetize their part of the Render Network.
And talk about your announcement. It was a few weeks ago now, I think, the Solana announcement, and why Solana?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a fascinating question. And certainly, for those that aren't familiar with crypto, Solana is another type of blockchain. You have Bitcoin, the original, that's like gold, and you have Ethereum, which is, the number 2, blockchain in terms of value. And that added, the ability to have programmable smart contracts. Most NFTs, most services are built on Ethereum, but Ethereum is pretty slow and it's super expensive. And anybody that's minted NFTs on what's called layer 1, which is the core Ethereum network, it destroys the environment and it's expensive and it's unusable for high-speed transactions. So, what's happened is that Ethereum itself, they're trying to fix that with what they're calling Ethereum 2.0, which is moving from a proof of work, which is just, slowing down the network and being expensive, to something that is, validated in a different way. That isn't ready yet. So in the meantime, other blockchains have emerged. We've partnered briefly with Algorand, which is a system that is meant to offer a different option. We also adopted layer 2, which is through a company, a blockchain service called Polygon, which is like a side chain. It has a lot less nodes, but you can run transactions faster, and then you can resolve them back on the Ethereum blockchain. And we added that because it was just impossible for us to run render and pay out people in a timely fashion. But none of those things solve the core problem, which is I have several things I need to see on the blockchain for me to build a business like Render, or even a decentralized organization, which is what Render truly is more than a business on such a system. I need fast transaction speeds. I can't really depend on layer 2 or these side chains for this one simple reason, which is that if there's 80 nodes or some small number of nodes that are making this Polygon or Matic, the side chain operate really fast, that also means that you have 100 nodes in AWS, you can take over that network and you can steal people's NFTs, you can do all sorts of bad things. So security and speed have to both be there. And the problem with a lot of layer 2 solutions is they don't have the security part. And Solana, from my perspective, and from people that I would say, again, I keep saying they're smarter people than me that have validated this to my satisfaction, including Brendan Eich, who has a company called Brave. He created Mozilla, JavaScript, Firefox, like redefined the modern web, and was one of the first people to get us ourselves into crypto. I mean, he launched Basic Attention Token 2017, helped us launch Render that same year. And he announced at the same conference I was at that he's moving basically to Solana. And for him, it was the security and the speed. And those things are so important that, you know, it feels like Solana is going to be that number 3 blockchain after Bitcoin and Ethereum. Those other two aren't going away. But if you need something better, faster, different, more programmable, Solana is pretty incredible. And the tech guys behind it used to be our ex-Qualcomm guys. Anthony is a genius. I mean, the stuff that you could do, not just on the network, but in terms of programming for it. You can write C++ code. You don't have to write some crazy scripting EVM language. You can depend on super fast transactions. It's got a built-in system so that, you know, you can pay with credit cards right from the get-go. And what's also interesting, one of the reasons why we picked them as a, you know, partner going forward is that they don't have a marketplace that's blessed by Solana necessarily, but they have a API mechanism called Metaplex, where you can build your own store and you can customize it. And they're defining that within the Solana blockchain, like they're doing with the credit card ingestion, so that this is important. Like most stores that we're seeing, or most, you know, artists are moving towards something where, you know, you have a virtual world that's your own collection of art, like a little mini metaverse, right? And you're seeing artists building that, and they want to be able to sell their artwork within that. And it's not easy to do that when you're doing a drop on Nifty or Makerspace or OpenSea. Those are kind of like legacy, you know, sort of ways of selling anything. And I think that Metaplex is much more organic, it's much more customizable, and more importantly, all of the asks we have, and we have a ton of asks because we haven't launched 90% of what we've built for NFTs and for how those work, because we've been waiting for the blockchain piece to sort of catch up. The Metaplex team is like, we're going to add everything you guys want and more, and it's a true partnership. So I do think that if you want to eventually get into selling your digital art, or you want to build a marketplace of your own, or you want to use Render and really come up with custom, you know, integrations for monetizing your art, Solana and Metaplex is going to be ready to go. And we'll support other things. It will work, of course, across chains. We're not dropping Ethereum or other chains, but, you know, there's no comparison, I think, to the performance and versatility that Solana is bringing us. So that and the security is pretty important. And the Render SDK itself, again, targeting Solana directly. So you'll be able to create pieces in the SDK that are securely run on chain. So if you want to have like a virtual world where the state of that world is determined by something on chain, that can be encoded into the Render SDK into that node.
Right.
Super powerful.
So if you want to make an NFT and you want to make it so it changes based on, I don't know, the weather or the time of day or the score of a football game, that's all going to be built in. Like, what is the minting process going to be like in that aspect?
So the minting on Solana is thankfully, if you're using the Solana piece, is effortless. But even minting on Render is one thing people kind of forget is that every time you're rendering anything on Render, doing anything on Render where there's a transference of payment or value, the entire input stream into that is essentially on chain. So if you've ever used the Render network, you can essentially call up the receipt of your render and say, this is the NFT of it. I mean, there's no extra NFT step. Now, if you want to mint that on Nifty Gateway or on OpenSea or on Solana even, sure. But by default, everything you're doing on Render is already recorded on chain, and there's already a receipt of that. In other words, when you re-upload a file again to render it as a 3D model, for example, if it's already been uploaded once, the hash of that is already on the Render ledger, and we can and are storing those things opt-in, right, on ARweave, which is an option where you can, or IPFS, which is the blockchain storage system. And those things allow you to basically already pre-mint everything. It's called lazy minting, where it's like you've already created the NFT and it's already all there. It's a question of when do you want to sell it and how do you want to sell it? And if you've already made an NFT, can you actually then reverse that and say, oh, my Beeple NFT, or Beeple, right, who's sort of our space monkey for some of these ideas, you know, his NFTs were long out of the gate sold, when we now have something called the Beeple archive, which is basically anything we can then add on Render. Now we have C4D file support. The other thing we're adding is Photoshop layers also on Render, so you can do the Photoshop filters live in there. And at Oracles, those things can all be rebuilt on Render, and the proof of Render becomes more valuable than the proof of NFT ownership, which could of course be anybody uploading an image saying I'm this artist or whatever. When you have proof of render, you can re-render that, you can make the job itself an NFT, or you can, as Mike was saying at the Mograph, Camp Mograph, right, where he may be selling a few NFTs a year, but he's doing obviously hundreds of pieces of art. I mean, at least 360 something every year, every day, right? I mean, those things should be on chain and they represent his body of work. That's where we want to sort of build this sort of healthy layer. That's sort of this metaverse layer too, where before you sell something, if you just want to build your brand or build your identity on chain, like it's cheap enough now, and it's even going to be more trivial with Solana, where you can do all that. And then you can think about how you want to monetize and when you want to monetize these pieces. But that layer, this archiving layer where your entire work ever done on render, all those pieces can be sort of be put into this archive system. I think it's fundamental to creating sort of, a record of you as an artist or creator, and two, coming up with, ways that are beyond just NFTs, right? Where you're selling an image to things that are truly, totally different ways of selling yourself as an artist that combine the best of what I think NFTs can offer with the best of what, Patreon and other things have, support, and even collaborative pieces become a lot easier. So those are all, those are deep areas of discussion we can dive in further into, but that's kind of where we see digital art, crypto art, and the systems that we're building to support it heading.
Question on the Solana front. So, correct me if I'm wrong, because I very well could be. Render was originally built off of the Ethereum network, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, and then did you switch that over at a certain point? So
we switched it once already to Matic, so
yes.
Polygon. And I'll be honest, that has not gone as well as we'd like, because the truth is there's two wallets now, there's two base, and it's like, holy crap, that is confusing. Even if Matic is faster, it hasn't been great, honestly. And what we're going to do with Solana is, unfortunately, but it's a step, but we're going to add Solana. So you're going to have, we'll probably at that point maybe retire the Matic option, and we'll just keep, ETH if you have it. So we'll have these three options. It's not like we already don't have two blockchains. The Solana team's already taken everything that we've ever done on ETH and already given us a Solana version for render. So we have zero code to write. It's already done. I just want to make that switch over painless for artists. And when we do it, or when we add it, there's going to be a point where you'll have both the Ethereum pieces of render running, but it's not going to make that much of a difference. Artists generally and node operators don't truly care, as long as their wallet can be hooked up and they can make money from running the nodes. Ultimately, that's all you really need to be a node operator. And whether those are paid out on a wallet that supports Solana or Ethereum is not a huge deal. I think for the node operators, artists typically, I have to say, they still want to pay us in dollars and with credit cards. So actually going to Solana and adding that means that we can actually on chain take credit card payments instead of having to store tokens and get your
cool.
All that stuff becomes a little bit simpler. And I think that next year we're going to add Solana, and then we're going to keep there's something called a wormhole, which means that everything you've ever done on ETH can be exposed or connected to the Solana blockchain. But for newer things, like if you want to build a dynamic NFT or you want to build awesome things for the metaverse, that is going to be on Solana. And yes, you'll have things that are stored, even our minting that we've done so far on ETH, they'll all be there. But I view NFTs themselves as so trivial. They're just pointers. Even on OpenSea, you're just pointing back to something. Typically, that's not even on chain. It's like half the stuff is on a the nifty gateway server or something, right? It's not even on the decentralized web. So all that needs to be redone. And the render system itself is sort of cross-chain. It has its own ledger, its own verification process that is verified in a smart contract on Ethereum, on Matic, and soon on Solana. But that's the least interesting part of it. I think the more interesting pieces are when you create art and you create modules and services and systems, impossible to do in both in code and in speed and in transaction volume on any other chain. And those, basically are added to the system, and all the benefits of Solana come with that next year. Then I think that organically you're just going to move everything over probably to Solana, and we'll keep the wormhole for any legacy data or assets or services that are running. But we've had a lot of experience. We still support older GPU drivers and things like that with older versions of Octane, as we have to sort of pare those back and add new ones. And that's sort of a gradient or a great gray area of transition. But I do think that everyone's sort of hungry for a better blockchain system than either layer 2 on ETH or layer 1 is delivering. So Solana is going to get us here next year, and there's tons of support coming from the team, from Raj, the co-founder of Solana. We've talked so much about the future. It's just incredible. I can't even begin to describe some of the bigger metaverse aspects and ideas that are floating around between all of this.
I'm assuming that will also speed up payments for node operators as well, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's instantaneous. I mean, that's what Matic was supposed to do. It's been complicated by the fact that the transition and even dependency somewhat on layer 1 ETH has just been, it's messier. And I think the new token economics model also will take into account the fact that Solana will be part of that going forward. I mean, that was something that also, there wasn't much of a point of putting out that model until the Solana piece was announced as this is a function of how the economy of render will work. We'll have this as a tool. We'll have this as a blockchain, right? And then payments in and out will just be so much faster, and the services that we can offer so much deeper. And ultimately, I think the important piece is both node operators and artists, and even those in between that want to participate in the render ecosystem as neither, because there are people that just may want to have IP or art that they want to put into the render network and, hire artists to build things around that. I mean, I see that as being one of the bigger metaverse components of render. I mean, all those things just need to be built on a solid foundation, and Solana is going to get us there pretty quickly.
I will say that, I enjoy buying collections and NFTs and stuff like that. And the other day, the Bone World NFTs, they were built on Solana, and buying them was easy, very easy. I mean, I went onto Coinbase, bought some Solana, transferred it over to a wallet, and was able to buy it, and it was so fast. Like, having done some of the other ones, like I know the Visitors was one collection, and also just recently the Dead Mouse, Deadheads. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Those, because you're working with Matic and you're working on Polygon, it's difficult to get that stuff, and it's expensive because you're having to transfer, to multiple different ways. But so when I heard the Solana news, I was really excited about that, especially being a node operator and seeing how that could benefit us.
Yeah. And I have so much to say just about the Solana ecosystem, because it's not just us, saying, hey, Solana is great for render. It's also like, look at the things happening in the Solana ecosystem. And I'll start with Brave. Brendan Eich is the reason why. I mean, he's the ultimate, sort of validator for me that the network's the future for all of us. But even having Brave, having a browser that has like 45 million users, the browser is deeply integrated with Solana. So I'm thinking that, frankly, all these issues of what you do in the browser, there's so many interesting things we could do with basic attention token and Brave. We've had that partnership for years. It just has been kind of waiting for the blockchain pieces to catch up. Decentraland's another partner. I mean, a metaverse shouldn't be Facebook saying this is the metaverse or any one company. It should be a little bit of these like organizations coming together, offering these elements that are, that are modular. And I feel like this is where some of those pieces really genuinely can come together, and I feel really good about that.
Now, I know that Dorpy taught us how to swap in our MetaMask, but I know a lot of people have asked a question too about, will you be able to just get render on Coinbase or some of those other platforms?
Yeah.
Are there any plans on that?
Those exchanges just list us whenever. So Binance just listed us, I think a couple of days ago, and yeah, I mean, I'm sure it'll be everywhere. It's just, especially I think since the Solana conference put a lot of attention on render in the crypto space, now everyone's like, we're just a lot more of a visible project, and I expect that just like with Binance, you're just going to see all the major exchanges at some point, have render on there. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of timing. I haven't been in any rush. I feel like it's important for us to map out what render is, where it's going. Even the Solana piece, like fundamentally, it's a good thing nobody was paying attention too much to it, because so much of what I'm seeing and hoping for and imagining for the metaverse and the future and the part that we play in it, it needs something like that to happen. And so I feel like, well, now that people are looking at it and the Solana part is a big part of that messaging, that's terrific. But yeah, a lot of things come with that as well. Obviously, being listed on exchanges like Binance without us, I mean, I don't think we even asked. I think they just did it. I didn't know. I found out like 8 hours after everyone else when I woke up. So it's kind of like, yeah, there's just tons more people in the Telegram groups talking about render. I'm active there as well, obviously, when I can. It's great. It's great to have more visibility. A lot more crypto folks are looking at render as they should, because I think, you think storage is important for the blockchain or the metaverse. I mean, compute is fundamental. Like, you can't get around that. I mean, you not everything's going to be done on device. Otherwise, we wouldn't need the cloud. Amazon wouldn't have a $32 billion AWS business and all that. I mean, there's a lot there that can be solved. And decentralization is a huge improvement over the system we have for centralized compute today. So it's super exciting.
Is there any talk with the folks over at Solana about them leveraging the render network? Oh
yeah. I mean, the partnership is bidirectional. So whatever we can use Solana for, they're also, I mean, for Metaplex, for example, like rendered is like a first, it's like a built-in kind of system. I mean, we're both all in. And that's the idea of a blockchain system or platform, is that, and it's kind of what I'm trying to do even within our own tools, right, where you can have a module for Evergen or World Creator or Sculptron in the node graph. The node graph itself becomes open source. The idea is that if you're using Metaplex, you can use Render. And Render has an API that allows you to programmatically do anything you want with it. It doesn't have to go through our tools. We have partners like Swatchbook that have an API that can generate renders for them. They sort of have a, their own wallet to pay for those. So I see this, Render itself being fundamentally, if you're building something on Solana, Render's there, along with many other services that interconnect. And that's fundamentally important. Also, Metaplex is there to help define the best way that NFTs could work and thrive on Solana, right? So if we're there in those early days helping to define that for things that are done on Render, which is a huge number of things that I think NFTs could be done in, both dynamic, real time, all those things, that's critical too. So we see this contribution as being bidirectional. And I would say that with Raj, who's essentially the co-founder, is the CEO of the Solana Labs ecosystem. I mean, he sees the world of the metaverse the same way that I do, and that's open source, modular, and we all are helping each other. Not a zero-sum game. It lifts up all these ships. No one's, by the way, trying to kill ETH either. It's just, this is what we have today. These are the tools, and time to market in some sense is important. Like, we waited 4 years to have some of these pieces ready. Mm-hmm. I'm not waiting another year, so I'm using Solana. Yeah.
So let's talk about some metaverse stuff. Like, I would love to talk even about like where you feel the metaverse is going.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on
about
Facebook's metaverse announcements and
everything. Where is the world going with the metaverse?
Yeah, I mean, I've been. This is hours of my time I could talk about the metaverse, honestly, because it does. Let me start by looking at a very high level. I will say that I agree with the general consensus that this replaces mobile, it replaces the internet, it replaces the web, it replaces in some ways social. So anything that's sort of transacted through the internet digitally is ripe for disruption for a number of reasons. And the metaverse, as a label or a name, is fine. I consider that accurate. So when Zuckerberg's talking about there being this whole new paradigm shift, I think he's right about that whether or not Meta as a company, Facebook, right, previously known as Facebook, is the arbiter of what the metaverse is or isn't on an implementation level. I don't know about that. I think that it should be like the open web. I mean, that's why, everything that I think about the metaverse almost begins with what is Brendan Eich doing? What is, he's the one that gave us an open web. An open web is really what allowed companies like Facebook and Google and Amazon and even Apple, when they started with Safari, to thrive and build multi-trillion-dollar market caps, right, that they have now. And I think that the metaverse is for sure, there's something beyond the App Store model. There's something beyond mobile. And you could say that it's augmented reality. I think that it's an obvious device type for the metaverse, because already you're going to have to rethink how these things work. The web is going to work differently. Apps are going to work differently. And I think there's such a clarity from Facebook and Apple, and maybe even you could say Epic and others, that the whole AR glasses ecosystem is going to be the starting point, right? Where, I mean, you could argue that the web didn't take off until you had the Netscape browser, or you had mobile, or you even had social media. Like, who knows where the forcing function was that made the web, the internet itself, this absolute fundamental part of daily life. But it's likely that mainstream AR is going to be a big driver towards having something very different that's metaverse-like. And I think that the metaverse should basically start with a model that is built on the blockchain, so that you essentially have one of the early lessons of the open web, baked into it, which is Brendan was saying, if I put a buy button in Firefox, there would never be the issues we have now with the app stores and 30% and all the Epic Google lawsuits flying around, because there is a world where you could have easily imagined. I mean, Steve Jobs, when he first launched the iPhone, and he's like, well, Safari is your app store. He meant that literally. It wasn't until later that he's like, aha, apps and native things on the App Store, let's charge 30%, became a thing. And Mozilla was working on a system for Firefox phones that would have had security layers, so web apps could have operated as native apps. It's still possible to this day. And my goal would be to help promote a system where anybody could develop, any app on any chain. Solana may be a great one to start with, but you have something that is, that isn't behind a store or vertical. And the danger with one company like Facebook, or even Apple or Epic or NVIDIA or anyone, or, controlling a large chunk of the metaverse, is that if you're going to redo this again, you don't want that 30% tax on everything. You don't want to have a model that is only based on Facebook's current model, right, which is you're the product and your eyeballs now are your monetization piece, because it's, obviously it's not great for privacy, and it's not great for all sorts of reasons that you can see exploding already today on social media. So my vision of the metaverse is it's a way to sort of revisit all the best parts of the open web with the lessons learned from the things that went wrong with the mobile social media ecosystem we have today. And it'll be proven, at the very latest on AR devices, where nothing is going to be the same when you have the glasses as the primary entry point into your digital experience. That doesn't mean that there won't be metaverses on iPhones, on PCs, on desktops. They'll just be different. It's a little bit like having black and white TVs in the age of color. You can kind of still watch color shows on black and white, but at some point you move to a different device, and that device is going to be spatial. So I think that's the practical parts of the metaverse. And then there's deeper pieces where I think if you're going to go and think about rebuilding the entire internet and the entire value proposition, let's start with art and content. We already see a market for digital art and owning that with NFTs that are interesting. You've seen streaming just eviscerate cable and live television. You have Disney Plus, these wars between these streaming providers. I see the metaverse just in the content side eliminating the Disney Pluses and the Netflixes, because if you just have one metaverse and it's like the web, and the way you discover content, even if it's all aggregated on what's so-called Disney Plus, it might not be behind an app on your TV set-top box. It might be in a very different form, and it might be that the intersections between things that are on Disney Plus and on Netflix intersect. If they're all spatial and they can all render together, and buying something or owning something or visiting something is all on the same spatial rendering service, then it becomes more like, well, if you're visiting Disney Plus and your eyeballs are seeing rays of light bounced off a Disney Plus piece, those are tracked. That's what the idea of Brigade, which was ads that are privacy-based, that are based on the surface area in the browser, are interesting. You could do ads, you could do monetization based on your visitation in the metaverse, and that could be a different model on top of the streaming subscriber model. It can all be there, but that's the kind of stuff that the metaverse might allow you to genuinely open up when there's not this verticalization or barriers between apps, platforms, and ecosystems, especially with a layer where every single piece of transaction could be charged for, could be subscribed to. You have those options. You don't quite have that easily on the web, and that's been a fundamental dividing factor, I think, in the mobile market we have today, and the reason why ads are so prevalent even on social media, because there hasn't been great monetization models through the web itself.
And I'm sure the render network is going to be involved in things like rendering AR on the fly and all of that based on those models. And then, of course, which need a lot more power, but the light field stuff, the holographic stuff that we know is coming eventually in real life, all of that. Gosh, especially that stuff, because I forget, you were telling us like the ridiculous amount of GPU power that some of that stuff needs right now. But how do you see render itself falling into this metaverse? Besides the render stuff, I guess, that we talked about earlier. Yeah.
So I think, yes, the render stuff is fairly straightforward as far as like if you want to create digital art and you want that to go on chain and or even create spaces that people can visit in the metaverse, right? That's fairly obvious. We have real time with Brigade. We have integration with Unreal. You can publish those pieces, and monetization or not, those are elements the render net will support. You need to have, even if you have the same compute power on your iPhone, the fact that, like, let's say the enterprise model, the one that I showed at the Apple event, is 100 gigabytes. You don't want to necessarily download that, and you don't want everyone. So there may be a case where it's like just render it on the network where it's already cached, it's on the edge or whatever, and those kinds of things are important for AR. And we can do streaming AR. It's actually not that hard because you have the depth data, and this is how NVIDIA does their Cloud XR, which is an API that streams from NVIDIA servers to any generic sort of AR or VR device. That's a pretty well-known system or method. So I'm not concerned at all about using render to stream to AR and having those effects work nicely. I think that's the area of deep work and research that we're going to be building on top of Brigade, on top of Unreal and Unity and other integrations next year. But where I see the more interesting elements in the metaverse is sort of exemplified by the render archives. And we have 3 of these that we started. One was Beeple. I mentioned that briefly, where all of Beeple's work that he's ever done, it's on chain. He can just hit render and it can basically create one of his everydays. It's from the C40 file, from the Photoshop PSD that's at the output of it. And those can then be, new ones can be built, right, that are dynamic, that are oracles. But I think the more, the other 2 render archives are really intriguing. One of them is Alex Ross's archive. He's a comic book painter and artist. He's the one that paints me as Marvel and DC superheroes, right?
Yeah.
But his art is 2D. But for 20 years, we've been building 3D versions of all of his paintings. It's like bringing to life. And he's done paintings that have redone, like, you know, Avengers #1, Fantastic Four #1, Action Comics #1 with Superman. Like, they're Alex Ross paintings that are beautiful, lifelike, you know, paintings, Norman Rockwell-like paintings of these comic book events. And here we are now rebuilding those in 3D. And those are not necessarily for NFTs. They're just to have those moments of the DC universe and Marvel universe brought to life for posterity. That's what he wants and we want for his work. And, you know, that's one path. On the other side, with the Roddenberry archive, yes, all of the documents, there's millions of documents. If you see the video that we put out with Gene Roddenberry's estate, that's all there. But we're also taking the blueprints from the team that worked for 30 years on Star Trek, Darren Dotterman, the Kudas, Doug Drexler, and we're rebuilding the Enterprise down to the nuts and bolts. The toilet's flush. You can push every button. It's completely insane. And the hardest part is we spent 6 months just figuring out exactly where that goes. Like, not even the work of the 3D model. Like, oh my God, no, this has to be this place. Because some of it was never filmed. Some of these things don't even fit. So you'll end up at the end of this project with, you know, for the Smithsonian level quality of museum, you know, which is where this will go. I mean, the team also worked on the 11-foot Smithsonian model that's hanging there. You'll have a digital version of the real Enterprise, and you'll be able to go back and forward in time and space, because it's literally like the ship of Theseus. It was rebuilt in 2270. Before that, it was the TV version. It blew up in 2285. So you have this 40-year world line in its universe. And then you have the alternate universes. You have the JJ version. You have all the ships before and after that were named Enterprise, which is very meta, right? And then you have the actual physical models in our universe, which is what I consider, well, modal reality. In other words, certain types of fiction include our world. You break the fourth wall, you're in our universe. Marvel actually has a number for the real world that we live in. It's called Earth 1218. The Marvel universe is 616, so on and so forth. So you can, the metaverse is an object that is the thing itself, the, you know, platonic abstract form of the Enterprise. It is not the 3D model. It's all possible 3D models as determined by the creator. And you can view it in the universe of Star Trek. It's canonicized in a sense by its when it appeared on TV and what we can then rebuild. Like, we can rebuild those each moment of that show, you know, in render, and which is crazy. And then you can explore that world or live in it or have branching stories. But you also have the ability to see in the real world where it came from, how it was done. And this modal reality system, that to me is the metaverse. And that's what we minted for Gene Roddenberry's 100th birthday and the archive system itself. I took all of the render we've ever had, most of it we burnt when we switched to a new chain. And I'm like, well, this is like the seed function for the archives. You can't buy or trade or sell it. You can just add to it. So it is a little bit like it's a not-for-profit system where you can put your artwork in there, but you can then point to that and make an NFT and say, well, this is my work in the metaverse or in this metaverse indexing system. That's what that M token was for. And that M token starts with like all of the work between Gene Roddenberry, Alex Ross, yes, even people, and all of that has each of these have their own Earth universes, narrative fictionally, where they interconnect, and they use the same system for the, you know, gravitational constant of the universe or things that are related. And that's kind of how. That's what that token's there for. So you can start to build things, and you can start to use assets. So for the Star Trek, you know, archive, we built like the entire solar system. We hired artists to do that, and we worked with NASA to get their entire star system in there, so we know where Vulcan is. Like, Roddenberry picked a planet or a star system for that. The Federation's light cone is only like 200 light years. It's not that far out. So, you know, you're in the Star Trek universe. You will go to warp, and you'll see those stars correctly rendered, because we're going to add that, you know, that entire system in there. But if you want to just have a star field that's correct for your NFT, well, those assets are there in anything that you want to do. So that is where that M for Metaverse, you know, archive is for. It's for this kind of artistic ontology or organization, a little bit like IMDb or Wikipedia for the Metaverse. That's necessary, and I bet everything on sort of starting that system is a really fundamental piece that we could start, and we could add important elements like the Roddenberry, you know, story of Star Trek and Alex Ross's Marvel and DC work, and have that be a basis for other works to bridge and connect from people. Is like the first that's like wildly, you know, unique and native, I guess, to the crypto art world, but it could go from there. The
Beepleverse. The site m.x.io. That is M.
It's a placeholder, really.
Yeah.
And it's for Metaverse. The other thing that's interesting about that is I also signed it. So when we did the August minting of that, it was on Roddenberry's 100th birthday and all that. There's 100 million concept tokens. They're just there. You can use those virtually. So if you wanted to have, you know, if you wanted, for example, have like who won this, you know, World Series and this thing, it's like those things are all there. All those concepts inside of the Octane node graph or the render node graph, that's where you can pull those in, and you can add, and new ones will be added. Like, we can just keep adding more and more every month. And they're not from Wikipedia, they're from Wikidata, which is a much more organized database, and we can add more elements in there. But with those pieces, you can have, instead of having a ray switch node, you can have a concept switch node. And concepts themselves can be used to determine how materials, textures, your node graph works. And that's all in there as well. So you have planets, you have realities, you have fictional things all there. But more importantly, you also have a lot of different layers for creating dynamic NFTs and also things that are conceptually scalar functions or things that you can build and test and create, essentially graphs around. And I think that's super cool.
Man, y'all should hear some of the conversations that we have off the air about Star Trek, Star Wars, Marvel. Yeah, that's fun. There's a question that I wanted to hit up while we're talking about the metaverse. You had the Render the Metaverse competition a while back. Now I feel like it has a whole new meaning. And the question is, do you have any plans to do that again?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that there is. I wouldn't even call it Render the Metaverse 2 because I feel like continuity-wise, everything that was rendered on Render the Metaverse in 2015, I think it counts, and that is actually something we can put on chain. So we're going to start it up again, and I think what we want to do is we want to get the Solana pieces going. We want to get Metaplex going so that you have those pieces easily there, but it'll be different. Like before we had, Facebook put up this money and whoever won got the money. And I want to have something that's much more deeply tied to the metaverse and the render. And we will start Render the Metaverse again, probably sometime in the first half of next year. And I think it'll go on forever is my vision. And there'll be ways for artists to continuously contribute to that. The Enter Metaverse piece will be an option. It won't, you can use that as well to build artwork and do things. But I want to have something that really does benefit like the top 10,000 artists in our ecosystem and offer something pretty interesting as a system and not just a temporary contest. So Render the Metaverse will absolutely be back next year. And it'll be truly metaverse ready now that the metaverse is much closer than it was back in 2014 and 2015 when we did the first Render the Metaverse with Alex and Carmack and me as the judges.
What do you think about, this is an interesting question about streaming in the future, because on something decentralized, I imagine that that's not really streaming compatible in that way. Where do you see streaming falling in all of this, and how would that work?
So just to be clear, you talking about live streaming for 3D or live streaming of?
Well, I guess actually that could be anything in this case, right? It could be live streaming, it could be 3D stuff,
So I did a tweet where I showed I think it was Darren Kim's did an Unreal NFT, and we're streaming that in a browser page, right? And that's an example of a live stream of something that is created art. I think that streaming is fundamental to the metaverse piece, because if you're experiencing something, like I'll give the enterprise as an example, we're going to have two modes where it's pre-computed as a light field, or it's live and you can render it, kind of in an offline way, which is maximum fidelity, for viewing or for a holographic panel. But the streaming piece is where I think it's fundamental to be able to visit these large data sets. And I think that one of the reasons why we're picking Solana is that if you're changing something in that live stream that the whole world has to then accept as consensus reality, we need a blockchain where I'm not trying to do all the physics and everything on chain, but I need the finalization of those physics, the placement. If you're going to go into Kurt's room and move the coffee mug, which there is a coffee mug in his room, right? 1 foot to the left, and you're the one that can do that, or you decide to do it, or you throw it at the wall. There needs to be something that does that, and the streaming piece is where those interactions can happen. And I think for artists as well, there's a whole other area where I see you have a lot of Twitch streams for people playing games, and you have a lot of live streams for people doing and creating art. And one of the things I'd like to do with Render is have it so that as you're creating artwork, especially if we have the ability to load in Blender and Unreal, and even if your Cinema 4D scene can be in there, it's like having live collaborative work sessions where people are building these things together and recording that could be cool. I mean, that's something that feels like it's a pretty straightforward element. And Headless Render did a big part of that too, because you can start with any app that's locally. You don't even have to have it on the chain, but as long as that's a transmitter to the render network, headlessly, the scene itself gets transmitted. It gets rendered on some node on chain, and all of that kind of works in this homogeneous way. And so that's where I see streaming of data, streaming of scenes, all those things come into play. We're in sort of a high latency offline job world right now for render, and NFTs are sort of that way. And I think that things that are live streamed are still kind of like, well, this is an appified or Unreal Engine game versus a persistent world that can be truly transformed persistently, although you do get that with Decentraland. I think our place in the metaverse is to provide a system where those things become straightforward for artists and creators, and any renderer or any system that is looking for some sort of consensus or open standards to build on. And I should say that OTOY and the render network itself, I mean, like Orbex is an open standard. It's called ITMF. We submitted it to Cable Labs. We want to, really make all the data itself be built on open specs, and that's why we brought in the Arnold guys and others. We want to see there be standards for the metaverse. It's so fundamentally important.
Whew. Anything else?
Let's see.
Else we want to talk about? I don't know about. I don't know if you have any updates on light field technology or anything. I know everybody's just curious when it's going to be mainstream.
Anything new with the holographic stuff?
Yeah.
Well, September. I don't think I did a show. Since this happened with you guys, right? But September, CNET and the press were invited to Light Field Labs to see the actual 20-inch display. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you guys, anyone that wants to check it out, we should include a link maybe at the podcast where they can see the CNET hands-on, experience with it. And,
is that the one with the gecko or something in it? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
The gecko. The gecko. And we are, by the way, testing the Enterprise on there. So I can tell you that it takes 14 cents to render at 720p on the render network, but it's 1,000 times more work to render that same Enterprise for one frame to run on that light field display, because it's 1,000 times the number of rays. It's crazy. So offline rendering, so real-time rendering keeps going into this sphere where probably what you could do now in Brigade blows past even what you could probably render in offline render 10 years ago, right? Even pre-Octane. And then we're at but that doesn't mean that we're done with offline rendering. We just have more things that could be offline rendered at a higher fidelity, a higher capacity. And so real-time and offline are both accelerating. Both will be supported by render, but holographic displays are particularly tough and tricky because they just require a ton more rays just to have a holographic standing white light hologram come out of that emissive display. So 1000x, it's crazy. It's 10 gigapixels per square meter, massive amount of GPU power just to get a still frame. We're working on how to get it to run in real time, but it's probably going to be using a light field as an intermediate format to get even that to run. So it's still going to require render. And my hope is that those displays, now that they're real, like you'll probably see artists like Mike or people, do physical displays with those in there, museums, concerts, Smithsonian. As I said, that the enterprise we're building could be in the Smithsonian, more likely through a holographic display. Like they could, if somebody were to fund that, they will get cheaper. They will be the cost of an OLED panel at some point, probably in the 2030s, 10 years from now. And then everyone will have those maybe in their place of windows. So you don't have to put on a pair of glasses, which is still a point of friction for some people to experience the metaverse spatially, which I think would be great.
Oh man, I can't wait.
Yes.
Anything else before we go? I think we've covered quite a bit, and I'm guessing you might have to use the restroom after 2.5 hours. We got to take a break. You didn't.
Yeah.
So
I'm good.
I'm excited to hang out on Saturday and talk more.
Me too.
It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, that'd be great. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, let's get out of the drop. If anyone who's listening has an NFT that they're dropping, shoot us an email, info@mograph.com, and we'll show it on the show. Let's get back to the other part.
All right.
The drop.
Is this the fucking mic?
Drop.
This is exactly what I should be doing.
Jules, thank you so much. You make me so excited for the future every time I talk to you. Like you always make the future look so positive, And I can't wait to live in your future.
Yes.
I can't wait either. I wake up every day very optimistic, seeing the potential, and frankly, I think there's some absolutely amazing potential in technology done right, and I think we've got every opportunity to get there, and the world is ripe for that. So, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
And I don't know about y'all, but I need a cigarette after that one. I'm gonna. Let me go through these ending notes here as fast as I can. You can rate us on iTunes, leave a review. You can also subscribe on your podcatcher of choice. Check out our newsletter. Subscribe to that. You can say you've been there, done that, got the T-shirt with the Mograph logo tee, the Paul Babb, Feel the Babb 2020 shirt. All the profits from that go to Doctors Without Borders. You got the Render Things T-shirt, hoodie, and long sleeve tee. The That Render is Fire shirt, which you're only allowed to wear ironically, unless you're shams. Check out that photo on our Twitter.
Yeah.
And then the Mograph Blandishment shirt. And, of course, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, mograph.com, TikTok. Look at our TikToks there. And next week, Billy Chitkin's going to be on. We're going to be talking about some of his new stuff, and we're talking about being safe when doing crypto online and all that kind of stuff. A lot of crypto heavy talk next week as well. So check us out. And that's all I got. That's all I got. Whew.
Yep.
I need a nap.
Amazing.
Thanks again. We really appreciate it. If people want to find you on the internet, how can they get a hold of you?
At Jules Urbach on Twitter, at OTOY on Twitter. Both of those are me.
Cool. All right. Well, we're going to get out of here. Until next time, I'm Dave.
And I'm Matt.
Jules.
Have a good one.
Later, yo.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Should I stop recording?
Yeah, you can stop recording.
Yeah.
All right. No, sorry. I need to get to play people. So yeah, somewhere,